Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. This is volume 187 of our true crime stories for sleep. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that these stories involve real people and real tragedies. They are shared not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and help raise awareness of warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's first story. Tonight we're going to explore a story together. A story that, like so many in the world of true crime, reminds us of the fragility of trust and the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. So, as we settle in, get comfortable and let your mind drift as we journey through the case of Jennifer Rothwell. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. We're in no rush tonight. Just listen and let the story unfold at its own gentle pace. Our story begins in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, in a quiet neighborhood where families wave to each other from driveways and children's laughter echoes through tree-lined streets. It was a place where people felt safe, where life moved at a predictable, comfortable rhythm. In the fall of 2019, in the community of Crèvecoeur, there lived a young woman named Jennifer Rothwell. She was 28 years old. That November, 28 years of dreams, ambitions, relationships, and memory. 28 years of being a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a wife. Jennifer was the kind of person people remember fondly. She had grown up in Kansas City, Missouri, graduating from Park Hill High School before venturing off to the University of Missouri at Columbia. There she pursued chemical engineering, a challenging field that required dedication, intelligence, and persistence. Jennifer possessed all three. At the university, she met a young man named Beau Rothwell. He too was studying chemical engineering. They were kindred spirits in many ways, both drawn to the complexities of science, both eager to build careers and lives that mattered. They became best friends first, sharing late-night study sessions, coffee breaks between classes, and conversations about the future they hoped to create. After graduation in 2013, their relationship deepened. What had begun as friendship blossomed into romance. On September 26, 2015, Jennifer and Beau were married in St. Louis County. Their friends and family gathered to celebrate the union of two people who seemed perfectly matched. Both were engineers. Both were intelligent and hardworking. Both shared common goals and values. Jennifer took a position as a process engineer at DuPont's Chesterfield office. It was good work, the kind that utilized her education and challenged her mind. Her colleagues liked her. Her mother would later describe Jennifer as someone who worked hard, someone people enjoyed being around. She had made friends at DuPont, created a professional life she could be proud of. Outside of work, Jennifer loved simple pleasures. She enjoyed traveling, playing games with friends and family, celebrating birthdays and holidays. Most of all, she cherished time with her loved ones. Her family described her as a bright light in their lives, a loving daughter, a caring sister, someone whose presence made gatherings warmer and more joyful. By all outward appearances, Jennifer and Beau had built a good life together in their home on North Winds Drive. They were young professionals with promising careers, a nice house and a future that seemed full of possibility. But beneath the surface, something had begun to shift, something that would ultimately lead to an unthinkable tragedy. In the fall of 2018, Jennifer and Beau made a decision that many couples make. They decided to start a family. It seemed like the natural next step. They had stable careers. They owned a home. They had been married for several years. It was time. But trying to conceive proved more difficult than they had anticipated. Jennifer had endometriosis, a medical condition that can make pregnancy challenging. What should have been a joyful journey became a source of stress and disappointment. Month after month, they tracked ovulation cycles. They scheduled their intimacy around fertility windows. What had once been spontaneous and loving became, in Beau's later words, a chore. As the months passed, the strain began to affect their relationship. The spontaneity faded. The closeness they had once shared began to erode. Beau felt the distance growing between them. Though he never spoke about it to Jennifer, instead he withdrew into himself, nursing resentments he never voiced. Then, in the summer of 2019, something happened that would set everything on an irreversible path. Beau began an affair with another woman. He would later testify that he and this woman started their relationship around June of that year, while Jennifer continued to focus on their attempts to conceive. While she held on to hope for the family they had planned, Beau was building an entirely separate emotional life. Through Facebook messages, Beau and this woman expressed feelings they claimed were love. They talked about a future together. The woman knew Beau was married, and Beau confided in her about his frustrations with his marriage. He told her he had been thinking about divorce for months. The messages between them grew more frequent, more intimate, more entangled. Throughout this time, Jennifer remained unaware. She went to work at DuPont. She came home to the house she shared with her husband. She continued to hope that soon they would succeed in having a child. She searched online for information, visited forums, tried to understand what they could do to improve their chances. Then, on October 26, 2019, Jennifer took a pregnancy test. It was positive. After more than a year of trying, after the stress and the disappointment, it had finally happened. She was pregnant, 6 weeks along. That evening, as they sat at home, Jennifer told Beau the news. He would later describe the moment as anticlimactic, strange even. Jennifer loved big reveals, he said. She watched reveal videos on YouTube, but this time she simply walked into the room while he was juggling a pizza delivery and their barking dog and told him she was pregnant. Beau's reaction was complicated. He later testified that he almost dropped the pizza. Outwardly, he began discussing nursery designs with Jennifer, talking about insurance plans for the baby, making calendars to track the pregnancy. But inwardly, he was torn. He was still in love with the other woman. He had been planning a different future, one that did not include Jennifer. The next day, October 27th, Beau messaged his lover and tried to end their relationship. He told her about the pregnancy. He said he had thought he would have the courage to go through with a divorce by now, that he had been thinking about it for 2 or 3 months. But now, with a baby on the way, everything was more complicated. The other woman was disappointed. She missed him. And despite his attempt to end things, they continued talking. Within days, they were messaging again, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. In their conversations, they discussed 3 possible scenarios, 3 options for the future. Option 1, end the affair completely. Move forward separately. Option 2, Beau would confess the affair to Jennifer and seek a divorce. But this option, Beau noted, would be financially draining. He would have to support a child and try to start a new life at the same time. Option 3, wait and see what happened with the pregnancy. If there was a miscarriage, they wrote, or something, he would leave Jennifer and be with his mistress. That word, something. It would take on ominous significance later. They settled on option 3. They would wait, see what happened. But they added a caveat. If the pregnancy continued without complications, they would default back to option 1. While Beau exchanged these messages with another woman, Jennifer was searching the internet for entirely different information. On November 4th, just over a week after learning she was pregnant, Jennifer looked up forums and websites about what to do when your husband doesn't care about your pregnancy. She searched for answers to a question that revealed her growing concern. What to do if your husband is upset you are pregnant? She sensed something was wrong. Perhaps she noticed Beau's distance. Perhaps his reactions to the pregnancy felt off. Not quite right. But she didn't know about the affair. She didn't know about the woman. She didn't know about the 3 options that had been discussed. On November 9th, Jennifer attended a trivia fundraiser at St. Mary's High School. She was involved with the Southside Early Childhood Center's Young Friends organization, a nonprofit that raised money to provide discounted childcare for families in need. She had been a member for 2 years. Even in the midst of her personal struggles, she was giving back to her community. And then came November 11th. Well, Monday. the beginning of what should have been an ordinary week, but it would be the last day of Jennifer Rothwell's life. November 11th, 2019 was a cold night in St. Louis. Snow was falling. The roads were treacherous. It was the kind of evening when most people preferred to stay home, safe and warm. Bo came home from work around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jennifer arrived 2 hours later, around 5. They settled in for the evening, watching Netflix together, spending time in the quiet comfort of their home. But Bo had made a decision. He later testified that he knew he had to tell Jennifer about the affair. He believed it was the only way to salvage any part of their relationship. The only chance he had to be involved in his child's life. If he didn't tell her now, he thought he would lose that opportunity forever. At some point in the evening, they sat down at their dining room table. It was round, made of wood, with 3 chairs positioned around it. Jennifer sat in the middle chair. Bo sat with his back against the wall. "Jennifer, there's something I have to tell you," he said. And then he confessed. He told her he had been having an affair. According to Bo's later testimony, Jennifer's response was immediate and intense. She wanted to know who the other woman was. Who was this person that her husband had been seeing behind her back? But Bo refused to give a name. He said it wasn't important. Jennifer grew angrier. She cursed at him. She demanded answers. The conversation escalated, tension filling the room like a living thing. Then Bo testified. Jennifer revealed something of her own. She told him she had been having an affair too. She claimed that at least her affair partner could get her pregnant, implying that the baby she was carrying might not be Bo's. This claim would later be proven false. DNA testing after Jennifer's death confirmed that Bo was indeed the biological father of the unborn child. But in that moment on that November night, Bo said he believed her. And he said he felt rage unlike anything he had experienced before. He described it as a red haze, a fog of anger that descended over him, clouding his judgment, overwhelming his reason. Bo stood up from the table. On the kitchen wall hung a food mallet, a tool he had recently used to hang decorations. He grabbed it. And while Jennifer was still sitting in her chair, he struck her in the right temple. Jennifer didn't fall immediately. She started to stand, to move toward the garage. Perhaps she was trying to escape. Perhaps she was simply trying to get away from the violence that had erupted so suddenly in her own home. But Bo followed her, and he struck her again. This second blow cracked her skull. The force of it sent her falling down the basement stairs. Jennifer Rothwell lay at the bottom of those stairs, bleeding. The injury to her skull was catastrophic. A medical examiner would later testify that it would have taken multiple blows to cause the damage that was inflicted. The right side of her skull was crushed. There were additional lacerations on the left side of her head. Jennifer was 6 weeks pregnant when she died in the basement of her home. She was 28 years old. Her 29th birthday would have been 9 days away. On November 20th, Wu stood in his basement, looking at what he had done. And instead of calling for help, instead of trying to save his wife, he made a different choice. He chose to hide what had happened. He would later describe going into panic mode. He believed he had to fix the situation, to hide what had occurred. And so he began to plan, but first he had to wait. He stayed in the house with Jennifer's body, waiting until the middle of the night when fewer people would be out, and he would be less likely to be seen. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Bo left his house. The snow was still falling, creating dangerous driving conditions. But he went out anyway, driving to different stores. He made purchases using cash and gift cards to avoid creating an electronic trail. He bought bleach, carpet cleaner, gloves, paper towels, all the supplies he would need to clean up the crime scene. He returned home and began the grim work of trying to erase the evidence of what he had done. He poured bleach over the blood-stained carpet at the base of the basement stairs. He scrubbed. He set up a fan to blow air over the wet areas. He opened the basement windows, even though the temperature outside was in the 30s, trying to help the carpet dry faster. Then he retrieved a tarp from somewhere in the house. He wrapped Jennifer's body in it. He did something else too, something that demonstrated a chilling level of calculation. He wrapped a plastic bag around her head and secured it with duct tape. He removed all of her clothing, leaving her naked. He later testified that he had seen people dispose of evidence on crime shows, and he was copying what he had learned from television. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, he carried his wife's body out to his truck. He drove out of town, heading north on Highway 61 toward Troy, Missouri. He drove until he felt lost until he found a wooded area from home. They're approximately 45 miles northwest of their house in Crèvecoeur. Beau stopped. He took Jennifer's body from his truck and placed it in the grass. He covered it with shrubs and tree branches. 5-foot-long branches, carefully positioned as if someone had deliberately placed them there. Then he drove away, leaving his wife's body alone in the cold darkness. His next stop was a business he knew had no security cameras. There he disposed of the cleaning supplies, the bloody carpet cleaner bottles, Jennifer's clothing. He threw everything into a dumpster, trying to eliminate any evidence that could connect him to what he had done. Then he drove home, back to the house where he had killed his wife just hours before, back to the bedroom they had shared, and he went to sleep. On the morning of November 12th, Beau began the performance of his life. He knew Jennifer would be expected at work that day. He knew her co-workers would notice when she didn't arrive. He knew her absence would raise questions, so he prepared. According to his later statements to police, Jennifer had left for work at 6:20 that morning. He claimed to have last seen her as she was leaving their home on Northwinds Drive. He said he assumed she went to her job at DuPont, but as the day progressed, Beau's phone rang. 4 calls from Jennifer's number. He didn't answer them, of course. He knew she wouldn't be on the other end of the line. Around 8 o'clock that evening, one of Jennifer's co-workers contacted Beau. Jennifer had never shown up for work, the co-worker said. People were concerned. Had Beau heard from her? Beau acted surprised, worried. He told the co-worker he would look for Jennifer. He and the co-worker searched for Jennifer's car together. They found it parked on the shoulder of Olive Boulevard, about 1.2 miles from the Rothwell home. The car was driving properly. There was no sign of an accident. Jennifer's cell phone was inside. At 9:44 that evening, Beau called 911. He reported his wife missing. He told the police dispatcher that Jennifer had left for work that morning and hadn't been seen since. He expressed concern. He asked for help finding her. The police responded. They located Jennifer's abandoned car. They began asking Beau questions, and an officer who spoke with Beau that night would later testify about something he noticed. Beau was crying. The officer said, but the crying appeared to be overplayed. It seemed forced, overly dramatic in a way that felt unnatural. When police asked to search the Rothwell home, Beau refused. He would not allow them to search his house. He would not allow them to search his car. He would not allow them to take his cell phone. He would not provide a DNA sample. He asked for an attorney. But even as he refused to cooperate with investigators, Beau was playing another role. He took to Facebook and posted a plea for help finding his missing wife. Some of you may have heard already, he wrote, but last night my wife Jennifer went missing. I filed a police report and the search is ongoing. Please, if you hear of anything or have any information, it would be greatly appreciated. Jennifer's family offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts. Her mother, Robin von Hausen, spoke to the media. She described Jennifer as someone who worked hard, someone people liked. She said Jennifer had just moved to western St. Louis County with her husband and loved her job at DuPont. The community rallied. People shared Jennifer's photo on social media. Volunteers organized search parties, and Beau Rothwell participated in these searches. He helped put up missing person flyers. He searched for a car he knew had been abandoned. He posted on social media. He acted the part of the concerned, devastated husband whose wife had mysteriously vanished. But investigators were already suspicious. On November 13th, police obtained a search warrant for the Rothwell home. When they entered, they were immediately struck by an overwhelming smell: bleach, cleaning products. The chemical scent was so strong it permeated the entire house. In the basement, they found what they were looking for: large areas of red staining on the carpet at the base of the stairs. The carpet was wet, soaked with bleach in an obvious attempt to clean the blood. But the blood had seeped through into the padding underneath. No amount of bleach could completely erase it. There was also damage to the drywall in the basement. Samples of human hair were found embedded in it. A fan had been positioned to blow air over the wet, blood-soaked areas. The basement windows were open, despite the freezing temperatures outside. Police collected samples and sent them for DNA testing. They also obtained DNA from Jennifer's parents to create a comparison profile. When the results came back, there was no doubt the blood in the basement belonged to Jennifer Rothwell. Investigators also pulled surveillance footage from stores in the area. And there was Bo on camera purchasing cleaning supplies on the night of November 11th. Bleach, carpet cleaner, gloves. The purchases had been made during a major snow event, during dangerous driving conditions. It was an unusual time to be out buying household cleaning products. The evidence was overwhelming. Even without Jennifer's body, police had enough to charge Bo Rothwell with murder. On November 13th, Bo was arrested and placed on a 24-hour hold. The next day, November 14th, the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office formally charged him with second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. While Jennifer Rothwell's body has yet to be discovered, the prosecutor's office said in a press release, "These charges stem from the evidence gathered by investigators. Jennifer's missing person case was officially reclassified as a homicide investigation, but the question remained, where was Jennifer?" For days, Jennifer's family held on to hope, however slim, that she might still be found alive. But as more evidence emerged as the investigation progressed, that hope dimmed. Then, on November 18th, Bo Rothwell's attorney contacted police. His client was ready to cooperate, the attorney said. Bo would tell them where to find Jennifer's body. That afternoon, around 5:15, police received information about an area in Troy, Missouri. Bo had given them directions to a wooded location along U.S. Route 61, north of Highway KK. Approximately 50 investigators and K-9 officers assembled. They drove over 40 miles north, following Bo's directions to the remote location. When they arrived, they lined up parallel to the highway and began walking through the treacherous terrain. The search lasted 5 hours. It was difficult work, combing through the woods in the cold, looking for something no one wanted to find. Then, around 11:15 that night, an officer named Matthew Zufall saw something pale in the darkness. He was just over 10 feet away when he realized what it was. "I got her," he called out. He had found a female body lying in a fetal position. She was naked, covered with brush, twigs, and branches. Some of the branches were 5 feet long or longer. They had been deliberately placed there, arranged to conceal what lay beneath. There was a black plastic bag around her head, secured with duct tape. But animals had gotten to the body in the weeks since it had been left there. The bag had been torn. The right hemisphere of the brain had been consumed. The skull was depressed, crushed from the blows that had killed her. DNA testing would confirm what everyone already knew. The body was Jennifer Rothwell. She had been found approximately 45 miles from her home. She was 6 weeks pregnant when she died. Her 29th birthday would have been just 2 days away. Bo Rothwell remained in custody. His bond was set at $100,000, which was later revoked entirely when he was charged with first-degree murder. The case would not go to trial for more than 2 years, and when it finally did in April of 2022, the courtroom was packed. The public was riveted by this case. A seemingly normal couple, a pregnancy that should have been joyful, a husband who had brutally killed his wife and tried to make it look like she had simply disappeared. The prosecution's case was strong. They had the physical evidence, the blood-soaked carpet, the surveillance footage of Bo buying cleaning supplies, the DNA confirmation that the blood belonged to Jennifer. They had Bo's own confession about where to find the body. They had the messages between Bo and his mistress, outlining the 3 options for their future, including the ominous or something that could have referred to Jennifer's death. They also introduced a notebook in which Bo had written a list of pros and cons about leaving his pregnant wife for another woman. The prosecution argued that this demonstrated deliberation, that Bo had been thinking about killing Jennifer as a way out of his marriage for months. The lead prosecutor, Thomas Smith, told the jury that Bo had struck Jennifer in the head with violent, homicidal force and crushed her skull. He presented testimony from the medical examiner, who said it would have taken up to 3 blows to the head to cause the injuries Jennifer sustained. Perhaps most damning was an audio recording. The jury heard. It was from November 18th, 2019, when Bo had agreed to cooperate with police and tell them where to find Jennifer's body. In the recording, Detective Jason Whiteside asked Bo if the body was concealed or clothed. Some brush, twigs, Bo's voice said, "A plastic bag over the head. No clothing." Throughout the recording, Bo never used Jennifer's name. He never used female pronouns. He referred to his wife only as it, the body and the head. The defense team, led by attorney Charles Barberio, did not dispute that Bo had killed Jennifer, but they argued that it was not premeditated murder. Instead, they claimed it was a crime of passion, an act committed in a red haze of sudden anger during an argument about the affair. Barberio pointed to evidence that Bo had not been planning to kill Jennifer that day. On November 11th, the day of Jennifer's death, the couple had discussed altering their insurance policy to include the baby. Bo had been making plans for the pregnancy. The defense argued this demonstrated that he had not been plotting murder. The defense also claimed that Jennifer might have fallen down the basement stairs during the confrontation and struck her head on a corner protrusion. But the prosecution's medical examiner testimony contradicted this, showing that the injuries were consistent with being struck with a weapon, not with a fall. On April 28th, 2022, Bo Rothwell took the stand in his own defense. It was a risky move, but his attorneys believed it was necessary. Bo spoke about meeting Jennifer in college, about how they were both chemical engineering majors, best friends who fell in love. He talked about their wedding in 2015, about their plans to have children, about how much they had wanted to be parents. Then he described the difficulties they faced trying to conceive. He talked about Jennifer's endometriosis, about how the process of trying to get pregnant became stressful, how sex became a chore. He said they grew apart. He admitted to the affair. He said it had started around June of 2019. He talked about the messages with his mistress, about the 3 options they had discussed. When asked if he had hoped for a miscarriage, Bo struggled to answer. He sighed. Finally, he said he hadn't hoped for a miscarriage, but he hadn't wanted to have to make a decision about his relationship. Bo testified that he had never thought about killing anyone before that night. He described November 11th as starting out normally. He came home from work. Jennifer came home 2 hours later. They watched Netflix together. Then he told the jury about sitting down at the dining room table, about confessing the affair to Jennifer. He said she became angry, demanded to know who the other woman was. He refused to tell her. She cursed at him. Then he claimed she told him she had been having an affair too, that the baby might not be his. Bill became emotional as he described what happened next. He said he grabbed the mallet off the kitchen wall and hit Jennifer in the head. She started to move toward the garage, and he hit her again. Her skull cracked, and she fell down the basement stairs. He said he panicked. He said he knew he had to hide what had happened, to fix it somehow. The prosecution's cross-examination was fierce. Thomas Smith walked Bo through every decision he had made that night. The planning, the purchases, the cleanup, the disposal of the body, the lie. Smith revealed something shocking. Bo had continued to talk to his mistress almost every day since his arrest in 2019, even while in custody, awaiting trial for murdering his pregnant wife. Bo maintained contact with the other woman. "You still had an affair while you knew you were having a baby?" Smith asked. The implication was clear. This was not a man who had acted in a moment of uncontrolled rage. This was a man who made choices, who planned, who calculated. After 3 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. The jury deliberated. They reviewed the evidence. The blood-soaked carpet, the surveillance footage, the messages about 3 options, about waiting for a miscarriage or something, the notebook with pros and cons, the way Bo had referred to his wife's body as it, the continued relationship with his mistress, the elaborate cover-up, and they reached a conclusion. On April 28th, 2022, the jury returned with their verdict. Bo Rothwell was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was also convicted of tampering with physical evidence and abandonment of a corpse. As the verdict was read, Bo closed his eyes. He tilted his head slightly down and exhaled. The jury had not believed his story of sudden passion, of acting in a red haze without thought or planning. They had concluded that he had deliberated, that he had committed murder in the first degree. The conviction carried an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. On July 8th, 2022, Bo Rothwell appeared before Circuit Judge Ellen Ribaudo for sentencing. Jennifer's mother, Robin von Hausen, delivered a victim impact statement via video. Her words were heartbreaking. "Jennifer was a bright light in our lives," she said, her voice breaking. "We thought we would have more than 28 years with her. Gone are the moments of joy with friends and relatives." She spoke about all the things Jennifer would never experience. She would never know the joy of holding her child in her arms. Robin said, "Instead, Jennifer walked that child through heaven's gates." Prosecutor Wesley Bell spoke about the unique tragedy of this case. "There's certain relationships that are supposed to be sources of comfort and security," he said. "Someone should certainly feel safe with their husband of all people, so it's a tragedy when anyone loses their life. But in this manner, obviously it's a little different." When given the opportunity to speak, Bo addressed Jennifer's family. "Words cannot describe how sorry I am," he said. "This should have never happened." He told the court he thought about Jennifer every single day. Then Judge Ribato handed down her sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder conviction. 4 additional years for tampering with evidence to run concurrently. And 4 more years for abandonment of a corpse to run consecutively after the life sentence. Bill Rothwell told the judge he planned to appeal. But for now, justice had been served. "We knew with the conviction on murder, first degree, that this man who killed his pregnant wife would spend the rest of his life in prison without eligibility for parole," Bell said in a statement. "That is what we intended for him to do, and today confirms that is what he is going to do." The case of Jennifer Rothwell resonated with people far beyond St. Louis. It became a reminder of how trust can be betrayed in the most fundamental way, how the person you sleep beside at night can harbor secrets that ultimately destroy you. Jennifer's obituary described her as someone who enjoyed traveling, playing games with friends and family, and celebrating life. Someone who loved spending holidays and birthdays with her family. A loving daughter, sister, niece, cousin, and friend who would be deeply missed. She had been looking forward to motherhood. She had been planning a nursery. She had been researching pregnancy, trying to be the best parent she could be. She had searched online for advice when she sensed her husband was not happy about the pregnancy, trying to find a way to make things work. And in the end, her trust in her husband, her hope for their future together, cost her everything. The case also highlighted something darker about modern relationships. The way technology allows people to maintain entire secret lives. The Facebook messages between Bo and his mistress documented an affair carried out in plain sight, hidden only by the privacy of a screen. The search histories on Jennifer's phone revealed her worries and fears in the days before her death. For Jennifer's family, the grief is ongoing. Robin von Hausen and her family must live with the knowledge that Jennifer's life was cut short, just as she was about to experience the joy of motherhood. They must carry the weight of all the moments that will never happen. The birthdays uncelebrated, the holidays without her laughter, the grandchild they will never meet. As we come to the end of this story, take another deep breath. Let it out slowly. The case of Jennifer Rothwell is one of many in the annals of true crime, but each case represents a real person. A life lived, dreams pursued, relationships cherished. Jennifer was not just a victim in a crime story. She was a daughter who loved spending time with her family. A professional who worked hard and earned the respect of her colleagues. A woman who wanted to be a mother. Her death reminds us that we can never truly know what lies in another person's heart. We can live beside someone, love them, trust them, and still be wrong about who they really are. But it also reminds us of the importance of justice, of communities that rally together when someone goes missing, of investigators who work tirelessly to uncover the truth, of prosecutors who fight to hold wrongdoers accountable, of juries who carefully weigh evidence and render verdicts. Jennifer Rothwell's story ended on November 11th, 2019, in the basement of her own home, but her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and the justice system ensured that the man who took her life will spend the rest of his days behind bars, unable to harm anyone else. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Tonight we're traveling to the farmlands of Ohio, to a place where green fields stretch toward the horizon, and families have lived for generations. This is a story about love and betrayal, about the fragility of trust, and about a little boy whose courage helped bring truth to light. Take a deep breath. This is the story of Jack and Linda Myers. In the early 2000s, Dark County, Ohio was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors. Rolling farmland dotted with homesteads, country roads winding between fields of corn and soybeans. The pace of life moved slower here, measured by the seasons and the harvest. At 7632 Martin Road, near the small village of Bradford, Jack and Linda Myers had built a life together. Jack was 51 years old, a man who'd worked hard his entire life. He'd grown up in these parts, knew the land and its rhythms. He repossessed cars for a living and rented out residential properties. Not glamorous work, but honest work. Jack had a reputation as someone who got things done, who didn't mince words, who expected people to stand on their own 2 feet. Linda was 55 with a warm smile and kind eyes. She and Jack had married 7 years earlier, in 1996. Blending their families together with the kind of love that comes later in life. Deeper and more certain. Together they ran the countryside market and pizza shop in nearby Houston, Ohio. It was a modest operation, but theirs. The kind of place where locals came for a quick lunch and stayed to chat. Their home sat on 40 acres of farmland. Not a grand estate, but substantial. Land has always meant something in rural Ohio. It means roots, legacy, security. It means you have something to pass down to the next generation. And speaking of the next generation, Jack and Linda were raising their 4-year-old great-grandson, Damian Huffman. Damian's story was complicated, as family stories often are. His mother, Amber, was Linda's granddaughter. Amber had been just 16 when Damian was born, too young to provide the stability a child needs. She'd done her best, but at times Damian had even been placed in foster care. Jack and Linda stepped in without hesitation. They gave Damian a home, a bedroom of his own. Routine, safety. They were preparing him for preschool, helping him grow, giving him what every child deserves. It was an act of pure love. Amber was getting her life together now, in her early 20s, married and making plans to regain custody of her son once he finished preschool. There was hope on the horizon. The family was working things out. Jack had 2 sons from a previous marriage. Travis, the older one, was 28. He'd had his disagreements with his father over the years. Money, mostly. Family dynamics. Travis had moved all the way to Arizona to put distance between himself and Jack. Though he'd recently returned to Ohio, the tension between them remained. Then there was Greg, the younger son, 25 years old, baby-faced, quiet. Greg had been the best man at Jack and Linda's wedding. He'd been close to his father once. Or so it seemed. But life hadn't been kind to Greg. He was struggling financially, battling substance issues, facing eviction from his home. He had 2 small children of his own, and no clear path forward. But we'll come back to that. For now, picture the farmhouse in late March, 2003. Still cold at night, winter holding on even as spring tried to break through. Damian sleeping in his little bedroom upstairs. Jack and Linda in their room, exhausted from another long day running the pizza shop and managing their properties. It was a Tuesday night, March 26th, 2003. Just an ordinary Tuesday, or so it seemed. The sun was beginning to rise on Wednesday, March 27th, when a neighbor happened to glance out her window around 4:40 in the morning. She noticed something unusual, a minivan she didn't recognize, parked in the Myers driveway, not Jack and Linda's vehicle. Someone else. She made a mental note of it. Small communities notice things like that. but she didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was family visiting. Maybe someone had car trouble. She went about her morning. Inside the farmhouse, something terrible had already happened. Damien woke up in his bedroom sometime before dawn. He was only 4 years old, barely able to comprehend what he'd experienced. During the night, he'd heard footsteps on the stairs, the sound of his bedroom door opening. A figure standing in the doorway, looking in at him. The little boy did something incredibly brave. He kept perfectly still. He pretended to be asleep, lying there in the darkness, barely breathing, hoping the figure would go away. And it did. When morning came and the house was silent, Damien got up. He went downstairs, looking for his great-grandparents. What he found in their bedroom would haunt him for years to come. Jack and Linda Myers lay in their bed, shot to death at point-blank range with a shotgun. Blood soaked the bedding, the walls, everything. Jack had been shot while he slept, never knowing what was coming. Linda had woken up, had time to see the gun, had raised her hand defensively. She'd been shot in the face, the blast making her unrecognizable. The phone lines in the house had been cut. Damien tried to call for help, but the phone was dead. So the 4-year-old did the only thing he could think of. Still wearing his pajamas and boots, blood on his clothing, he walked out the front door and started down Martin Road. He walked a mile in the cold morning air, all by himself, until he reached Oakland Church of the Brethren, where his preschool was located. He arrived at 9:15, an hour late for class. The daycare staff immediately knew something was wrong. Damien was out of breath, disheveled, his clothes stained. When they asked him what happened, he told them in the only way a 4-year-old could. "My grandparents are melting." Staff member Marlene Harris didn't hesitate. She called the sheriff's office. When the Dark County Sheriff's deputies arrived at 7632 Martin Road, they found exactly what Damien had tried to describe. One investigator would later say it was one of the most graphic crime scenes he'd ever experienced. Jack Myers, 51 years old, shot while he slept. Linda Myers, 55 years old, shot while trying to defend herself. The house showed signs of staging. The phone lines had been deliberately disconnected. It looked like someone had tried to make it appear as a break-in, but oddly, nothing had been stolen. A deposit bag from the pizza shop sat in plain sight in the kitchen, containing a significant amount of cash, completely untouched. Drawers and closets hadn't been ransacked. Valuables remained in place. This wasn't a robbery, this was something else. A shoe print was found near a basement window, size 7.5. The print would be cast and analyzed. Investigators examined the bodies. The wounds indicated a 12-gauge shotgun, fired at close range. The killer had been methodical, calm enough to stage the scene and cut the phone lines. Damien was immediately placed in protective custody, moved to a secret location away from all family members. The authorities feared the killer might come back for him, the only witness. When investigators spoke to the traumatized child, he told them about the figure he'd seen in his doorway during the night. He called it a green monster or green dragon. The detectives took note. Perhaps the killer had been wearing green clothing. To help Damien communicate what he'd seen, investigators built him a model dollhouse, complete with toy figures. Slowly, gently, they let him reenact the morning. He moved the figure representing the intruder to his bedroom door. "I heard a click," he whispered, meaning the sound of the door opening. It was clear the boy had seen the killer. The investigation now had to answer a crucial question. Who would want Jack and Linda Myers dead? In any murder investigation, police look at the inner circle first. Family, friends, business associates, people with motive and opportunity. The first person who drew suspicion was Andrew Huffman, Damien's biological father. Amber, Damien's mother, told investigators there had been ongoing custody disputes between Andrew and Linda Myers. Andrew didn't provide financial support for his son, and Linda had prevented him from visiting Damien because of this. There was bad blood. Andrew had even made threats, according to Amber, but Andrew had an alibi. He'd been in Kentucky when the murders took place. His employer confirmed it. The timeline didn't work. Andrew was ruled out. Next, investigators turned their attention to Travis Myers, Jack's older son. The 28-year-old had openly acknowledged his contentious relationship with his father. He'd moved to Arizona specifically to get away from Jack. And interestingly, Travis drove a white minivan, the same type of vehicle the neighbor had seen in the driveway that morning. Travis agreed to take a computer voice stress test. He passed. His alibi checked out. He'd been nowhere near the farmhouse when his father and stepmother were killed. So who did that leave?
Greg Myers.
The younger son, 25 years old, father of two, struggling with financial problems and substance abuse. At first glance, Greg didn't seem like a likely suspect. He had no criminal record. He'd been close to his father, had served as best man at Jack and Linda's wedding. He was soft-spoken, had a baby face that made him look younger than his years. But when detectives dug deeper, a different picture emerged. Money, or rather, the lack of it. Greg Myers was in serious financial trouble. He'd recently asked his father for a loan to save his house from foreclosure. Jack had said no. Greg was facing eviction, had two young children to support, a job he barely showed up for at NK Parts, and a substance problem he couldn't afford to feed. He was desperate, and according to Jack's will, Greg stood to inherit the farmhouse and its 39 acres of land when his father died. 40 acres in Dark County represented security, wealth, a fresh start, everything Greg needed. Investigators learned something else. A family friend named John Helmendaler came forward with a troubling piece of information. Greg had approached him weeks before the murders and asked where he could get a shotgun to kill his father. Helmendaler had thought Greg was joking, or maybe just venting. People say things when they're angry, after all. But after Jack and Linda were found dead, Helmendaler realized it hadn't been a joke at all. Greg's girlfriend Jennifer Brown told investigators something else. On the morning of March 27th, when she woke up, Greg was already gone. He'd left for work unusually early. She tried calling him at 4:36 a.m., but he hadn't answered. 4:36, that was around the time the neighbor saw the unfamiliar minivan in the Myers driveway. Greg drove a minivan, but the shoe print found at the scene was size 7.5. Greg's shoe size didn't match. The evidence was circumstantial, suggestive, but not conclusive. The police needed more. On March 29, 2003, just 2 days after the murders, Greg Myers was arrested and charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder. His bail was set at $500,000. Now the investigators had to build a case that would hold up in court. They needed physical evidence. They needed the murder weapon. Detective Rodney Baker was tasked with a seemingly impossible job. Figure out where Greg had obtained the shotgun or ammunition. It was tedious, exhausting work. Baker started with the evidence they'd collected from Greg's home. Among the items was a gift card. Just a small detail, but Baker followed the thread. He traced the card to a store where it had been used 2 days before the murders. The purchase: 12-gauge shotgun ammunition, the same type used to kill Jack and Linda Myers. But where was the gun itself? The investigators reasoned that Greg would have taken one of a few possible routes from the crime scene to his workplace. They mapped out these paths. Approximately 30 miles of roads and bridges. For 5 days, they searched every inch. Rivers, ditches, culverts, anywhere someone might dispose of evidence. Nothing. Finally, a deputy suggested checking the Stillwater River, where it crossed State Route 185 in Miami County. On April 1st, 2003, searchers found it. A 12-gauge shotgun lying in a shallow portion of the river. But the investigators weren't satisfied. If the gun was there, what else might be? They expanded the search, walking more than half a mile along the riverbank. And there, caught in the overhanging branches of a tree, was a garbage bag. Inside that bag was a treasure trove of evidence. A green tracksuit, the Green Dragon Damian had described. 12-gauge shotgun shells, matching the ammunition purchased with the gift card. A pair of shoes, size 7.5, matching the print found at the crime scene. Greg had worn shoes that weren't his actual size to deflect suspicion. Latex gloves, and on the inside of one glove, impossible to see with the naked eye but revealed through forensic analysis, was a fingerprint. Greg Myers' fingerprint. The gun itself had a partially obliterated serial number, but forensic experts were able to recover enough of it to trace the weapon. It had been sold by a private seller named Eugene Adams to Greg Myers on March 25th, 2003, 2 days before the murders. Adams positively identified Greg as the buyer. The sale price was approximately $175. Greg had even used his own phone to call the classified ad. The call records were there, clear as day. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. In April 2004, Greg Myers went to trial for the murders of his father and stepmother. Prosecutor Richard Howell had offered Greg a plea deal that would take the death penalty off the table in exchange for a guilty plea to aggravated burglary and 2 counts of aggravated murder. Greg, on the advice of his attorney L. Patrick Mulligan, chose to go to trial instead. The courtroom was packed. Linda Myers' family members attended wearing t-shirts bearing silkscreen photographs of the murdered couple, a constant visual reminder of what had been taken from them. The prosecution presented the physical evidence. The shotgun recovered from the river, the green tracksuit, the shoes that matched the print, the fingerprint on the latex glove, the gift card used to buy ammunition, the cell phone records showing Greg had called about purchasing the gun, the timeline placing him at the scene. John Hellman Dollar testified that Greg had asked where to get a shotgun to kill his father. Jennifer Brown testified that Greg had left unusually early on the morning of the murders and hadn't answered when she called. The neighbor testified about the unfamiliar minivan in the driveway around 4:40 a.m. Most heartbreaking of all, the jury heard about Damien, the 4-year-old boy who had witnessed a green monster in his doorway, who had found his beloved great-grandparents dead, who had walked a mile alone to get help, telling the daycare staff his grandparents were melting. The defense tried to paint a picture of a troubled family. They called Jack's sister, Mae Williams, who testified that Jack had been the family bully and hadn't nurtured his sons. They suggested that Greg and his brother Travis had grown up in an abusive household without their father's support. The defense attorney Mulligan argued that many people supported Greg, that he had the moral backing of friends and community members who believed in his innocence. But the evidence was overwhelming. After just 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all charges. Travis Myers, Greg's older brother, buried his face in his hands when he heard the verdict. "It tears us apart because we were close with Greg," said Linda's daughter Kim Huddleston to reporters afterward. The trial moved to the penalty phase, where the jury would decide whether Greg should receive the death penalty or life in prison. Ultimately, the jury spared Greg's life. On April 29, 2004, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the 2 murder convictions. He received an additional 5 years for aggravated burglary and 6 years for use of a makeshift silencer, all to be served concurrently. Greg filed an appeal in 2006. Alleging unfair jury selection, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his conviction. So what happened to everyone after the trial? Greg Myers, now in his late 40s, remains incarcerated at Marion Correctional Institution in Ohio, a medium security facility. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, never eligible for parole. He lost his gamble, the 40 acres, the farmhouse, the inheritance he killed for. None of it became his. And Damien Huffman, a little boy at the center of this tragedy. Amber, his mother, did eventually regain custody. She appeared in several true crime documentaries about the case, talking about how Damien struggled with nightmares for years. He'd wake up scared, seeing that green monster again in his mind. But he received counseling, and slowly, gradually, he began to heal. By the time he was 16, according to a 2014 episode of On the Case with Paula Zahn, Damien was doing well. He'd found ways to cope with the trauma, had built a life for himself, despite the horror he'd witnessed at such a young age. As of 2019, Damien was working for a manufacturing company in Ohio and had developed a passion for motorcycles. He's kept a low profile over the years, understandably, but in 2017 he agreed to participate in an investigation discovery documentary called American Monster: The Green Monster. The episode included never-before-seen home movies of his life, with Jack and Linda, showing the love and care they gave him. Those memories, at least, remained untainted. Linda's daughter Darlene O'Neill spoke to reporters after Greg's conviction. "To know that he did this all out of greed," she said, "that cuts like a knife."
And that's really what this case comes down to, isn't it? Greed, impatience, a sense of entitlement to what someone else had built through years of hard work.
Jack and Linda Myers weren't perfect people. Family members testified that Jack could be difficult, demanding, tough on his sons, but they didn't deserve what happened to them. They were trying to make a difference in a little boy's life, giving him stability and love when his own parents couldn't. They were asleep in their own bed, in their own home, when Jack's son crept in before dawn and ended their lives for the promise of 40 acres and a fresh start. The farmhouse at 7632 Martin Road still stands, though it passed to other hands long ago. The countryside market and pizza shop in Houston closed. The Myers family scattered, forever changed by what one of their own had done. In small communities like Bradford, Ohio, these kinds of crimes cut especially deep. Everyone knew everyone. The Myers were neighbors, customers, familiar faces at church and the grocery store. To learn that the killer came from within the family made it somehow worse. Betrayal always hurts more when it comes from those closest to us. But there's also something remarkable in this story. A 4-year-old boy's courage. His quick thinking to pretend he was asleep when the killer checked on him. His determination to walk a mile alone to get help. His resilience in the face of unimaginable trauma. Damian Huffman is the hero of this story, even if he probably doesn't think of himself that way. The investigators deserve recognition too. Detective Rodney Baker's patient work, tracing that gift card. The deputies who spent days searching roads and rivers. The forensic technicians who lifted that crucial fingerprint from inside the latex glove. The whole team that built an airtight case. Piece by careful piece, justice was served. As much as justice can be served in a case like this, Greg Myers will never be free. Jack and Linda Myers can rest, knowing their killer was caught and convicted. And Damian grew up, found his way forward, built a life. That's something. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. Tonight we're going to explore a story that is both heartbreaking and transformative. A story about a young woman with dreams for her future, about the dangers that can hide in familiar places, and about a mother's unwavering determination to turn tragedy into pull to change. This is the story of Alicia Bramfield. Let the details wash over you as we journey through this case together. At a pace that allows you to drift peacefully while honoring the memory of a life taken far too soon. The summer air in Plainfield, Illinois carried the warmth of possibility in 2012. In this quiet suburb southwest of Chicago, 21-year-old Alicia Bramfield was preparing for the most exciting chapter of her life. Alicia had dark hair and a bright smile that drew people to her. She was the kind of person who worked hard for everything she had. Born on August 28, 1990, Alicia had graduated from Joliet Catholic Academy in 2008, where she'd been known as a dedicated student with big dreams. By 2012, Alicia was attending Western Illinois University, pursuing not one but two demanding degrees. She was studying forensic psychology and criminal justice, drawn to the idea of understanding the human mind and seeking justice for others. She was just one semester away from graduation. One semester away from walking across that stage and beginning her career. But Alicia's dreams extended beyond her own accomplishments. She was 6.5 months pregnant with a baby girl she'd already named, Ava Lucille. The name rolled off the tongue like a promise, like a future full of love and laughter. Alicia had met Ava's father in college, but he'd made it clear he didn't want to be involved in raising their child. Rather than let this devastate her, Alicia had made a decision. She would be a single mother. She would work hard, finish school, and give Ava the best life possible. To make this dream a reality, Alicia worked at a job she'd held since she was 16 years old. She worked for Grand Flower Growers, a company that supplied and maintained the garden centers at Home Depot stores. It was seasonal work, but it paid during the off-season too, which was essential for a college student preparing to become a mother. Alicia took this job seriously. She showed up on time, worked hard, and did everything she could to ensure her position was secure. She knew she needed this income. She knew Ava's future depended on it. What Alicia couldn't have known was that this job, the one she worked so hard to keep, would lead her into the path of a man whose obsession would cost her everything. Brian Cooper was 36 years old in 2012, 15 years older than Alicia. He worked as a regional supervisor for Grand Flower Growers, managing the garden centers at several Home Depot locations in northern Illinois. To the outside world, Brian might have seemed like an ordinary manager, but those who worked under him, especially the young women, knew something was wrong. They saw the warning signs that others missed or chose to ignore. Brian had a temper. It would flare up suddenly, like a match struck in the darkness. He would slam items around the store, throwing things in fits of rage that left employees frightened and customers uncomfortable. On one particularly hot day, when the temperature soared above 100 degrees, Alicia asked Brian for a break. She was 6 months pregnant, and the heat was overwhelming. Brian denied her request. Later that same day, Alicia became visibly ill from the heat. A co-worker named Hannah Clem witnessed Brian's explosive reaction when confronted about this. Brian began yelling at Alicia in front of everyone, hurling insults at her and another female employee. He called them degrading names. The store manager marked Hannah to send Brian home. As Brian left the parking lot, witnesses said he continued his tirade. He was screaming, throwing things, acting in a way that made people wonder if he was dangerous. One co-worker later said that anyone watching that display could have concluded Brian had either lost control of himself or was deliberately trying to frighten Alicia. But this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Brian had targeted another young woman before Alicia. He'd made advances toward her, harassed her, made her so uncomfortable that she eventually quit her job rather than continue working under him. When that young woman left, Brian's attention shifted fully to Alicia. He began calling Alicia his girlfriend to their coworkers. Even though they had never dated, even though Alicia had made it clear she wasn't interested in a romantic relationship with him, even though she was pregnant with another man's child, Brian would text Alicia after work hours, pressuring her to spend time with him alone. He wanted more than friendship, and he made that abundantly clear. When Alicia didn't reciprocate his feelings, Brian would become angry. He would call her names at work. Bitch, slut, whore. He said these things within earshot of customers and other employees, humiliating her publicly. On at least 2 separate occasions, Brian called Alicia a derogatory name in front of others. Alicia was scared of him. She confided in her coworker, Elwell, telling her friend, "Don't leave me with him." But Alicia felt trapped. She'd complained to management about Brian's behavior. She'd told them about the harassment, about the names he called her, about how uncomfortable he made her feel. Management's response was minimal. They ordered Brian to take anger management classes. Brian enrolled in the classes, but he never completed them, and no one followed up. No one checked. No one held him accountable.
Alicia wanted to quit. She knew she should quit, but she was pregnant, visibly pregnant, and she knew finding another employer willing to hire her would be nearly impossible. She needed the income. She needed the job security that came with working for a company during the off-season. So Alicia stayed. She endured Brian's harassment because she was thinking of Ava. She was thinking of the future. She was trying to survive until graduation, until she could start her career, until she could provide the life she dreamed of for her daughter. Brian had also been finding other ways to violate Alicia's privacy and autonomy. He had a dog, and he'd convinced Alicia to walk the dog for him on several occasions. He gave her a key to his house. What Alicia didn't know was that Brian had installed hidden cameras in his bathroom, positioned to record anyone who used the toilet. Every time Alicia came to his house to walk his dog, every time she used his bathroom, Brian was recording her without her knowledge or consent. He was collecting videos of her in her most private, vulnerable moments. This was the man Alicia worked for. This was the man who controlled her work schedule, her hours, her livelihood. This was the man who held power over her future and her baby's future. And in August of 2012, Brian Cooper would use that power to manipulate Alicia into a situation from which she would never return. It started as a simple request. Brian's sister, Kelly Stryker, was getting married. The wedding would take place in Door County, Wisconsin, a beautiful area known for its scenic lakeside views and peaceful resorts. It was about a 4-hour drive from Plainfield. Brian asked Alicia to be his date to the wedding. Alicia said no. She didn't want to go. She told her friends she didn't want to go. The thought of spending an entire weekend with Brian, hours away from home, made her deeply uncomfortable. But Brian wouldn't accept her refusal. He threatened her. If she didn't go with him to the wedding, he told her he would fire her.
or he would reduce her hours so dramatically that she wouldn't be able to support herself. He would take away the job she desperately needed. Alicia felt she had no choice. When friends asked her why she agreed to be his date, she gave a simple answer that spoke volumes about her situation. "I need to keep this job." So Alicia agreed to go. She tried to reassure her mother, Sherry Anichich, that everything would be fine. She told Sherry they'd be staying at the hotel with the whole wedding party, so they'd all be in the same place. And then they'd drive home the next morning. It would be fine. On Friday, August 18th, 2012, Brian and Alicia left Plainfield together and drove to Wisconsin. Brian had booked them a room at the Sand Bay Beach Resort in Naswapee, a quiet area of Door County. The morning of the wedding, August 19th, Alicia called her mother. Something had gone wrong. Sherry could hear it in her daughter's voice. "We're packing up the car to leave," Alicia said. "Why, what happened?" Sherry asked. "We got in a fight," Alicia explained. Sherry was confused. How could he do that to his sister? He was walking his sister down the aisle. "I don't know," Alicia replied. Sherry told her daughter to call Brian's sister at the hotel and let her know they weren't coming. But Alicia's next words made Sherry's stomach drop. "I don't know where she's staying," Alicia said. "What do you mean? You guys aren't at the same place?" No, Brian had lied. Or at least he deliberately misled both Alicia and her mother. The entire wedding party was staying at one hotel, but Brian had booked a separate room for himself, and Alicia at a different resort entirely. They were alone, isolated from everyone else. This revelation troubled Sherry deeply, but Alicia texted her later and said everything was okay. They were staying. They would attend the wedding after all. Later, investigators would piece together what that argument had been about. Alicia had finally reached her breaking point. She told Brian that after this wedding, after they returned to Illinois, their friendship was over. She was done. She wanted nothing more to do with him. But she agreed to act as his date for the evening, to get through the wedding for the sake of his sister, and then they would go their separate ways. Brian smiled. He walked his sister down the aisle at the intimate outdoor ceremony. They celebrated the newlyweds at the reception. Witnesses later said Brian was drinking throughout the evening, though accounts varied about exactly how intoxicated he appeared to be. Alicia didn't drink. She was pregnant, thinking of Ava, taking care of herself and her unborn child. After the last champagne toast, after the celebration wound down, Brian and Alicia returned to their room at the Sand Bay Beach Resort. Brian asked Alicia to stay another day, to do something together on Sunday. But Alicia refused. She wanted to go home. She fell asleep, probably exhausted from the stress of the day, from maintaining appearances at a wedding, while knowing her relationship with her boss, with this man who controlled so much of her life, was ending. What happened next would be described in chilling detail in Brian's own confession. Sometime between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, in those dark hours when the world is quiet and still, Brian made his decision. He woke Alicia up. He climbed on top of her, and then he wrapped his hands around her neck and began to squeeze. Alicia fought. She struggled. In his later confession, Brian admitted that the struggle was so intense they fell off the bed and onto the floor. He continued strangling her. His hands pressed harder and harder against her throat, cutting off her air, cutting off her life. Alicia begged him to stop. She pleaded with him to think of the baby. "Think of the baby," she said. "Think of Ava. Think of the innocent life growing inside her. Think of the future." Brian didn't stop. He squeezed as hard as he could. He kept squeezing until Alicia's tongue came out of her mouth. He kept squeezing until she stopped moving. He kept squeezing until she was dead. The medical examiner would later determine that Brian strangled Alicia for at least 5 minutes, possibly longer. 5 minutes of sustained, deliberate violence. 5 minutes during which he could have stopped at any moment but chose not to. 5 minutes during which Alicia Bramfield and her unborn daughter Ava Lucille died together. But Brian wasn't finished. After Alicia was dead, Ryan removed her clothes. He removed his own clothes. He later told investigators he wanted to see her naked. Then he sexually assaulted her corpse. Brian also confessed to something investigators discovered independently. He had brought a hidden camera with him to Wisconsin. He had concealed it in the bathroom trash can of their hotel room. He had recorded Alicia getting out of the shower naked without her knowledge or consent. His obsession with her had extended to documenting her in her most vulnerable moments, even on the trip where he would ultimately kill her. After the assault, Brian told police he tried to kill himself. He said he couldn't go through with it. He tried again, attempting to drown himself in Ellison Bay. Again, he said he couldn't do it. He slept in the bathtub that night, with Alicia's body in the room. The next morning, Brian walked to a gas station. Surveillance cameras captured him entering, his clothes wet from his reported suicide attempt in the bay. He walked up to the clerk and asked to use the phone. He called 911. "I want to report a murder," Brian said. The operator asked who had been murdered. "Alicia Bramfield." "Do you know who did it?" "I did." The operator asked if it was accidental or intentional. Brian's response was chilling in its casual honesty. "It was intentional. I'm a good person besides what I did last night." Alicia's family is going to flip. Everyone is going to flip. Door County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the gas station and took Brian into custody. Sheriff Terry Vogel later noted that this was Door County's first homicide in more than a decade. It was a quiet area, a place where people went to celebrate weddings and enjoy peaceful vacations, not a place where young pregnant women were murdered in their hotel rooms. Investigator Mark Winkle went to the Sand Bay Beach Resort and entered the room. There, he found Alicia's body. She was 21 years old. She was 6.5 months pregnant. She had been 1 semester away from graduating with 2 degrees. She had been preparing to become a mother. Now she was gone, and Ava was gone. 2 lives ended by 5 minutes of violence. Brian Cooper was charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide for the deaths of Alicia Bramfield and Ava Lucille, and 1 count of third-degree sexual assault for the post-mortem rape. In June of 2013, Brian went to trial. The prosecution had a strong case. They had Brian's videotaped confession, in which he described the murder in detail. They had the 911 call. They had forensic evidence. They had testimony about Brian's obsession with Alicia, about the hidden cameras, about the harassment. Sherry Anichich sat in that courtroom and listened to every horrific detail about what had been done to her daughter. She saw the evidence. She heard the confession. She waited for justice. The jury found Brian guilty of third-degree sexual assault. But on the 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, the jury was deadlocked. They couldn't reach a unanimous decision. The reason? Brian's defense had argued voluntary intoxication. Wisconsin law at the time allowed defendants to argue that they were so intoxicated they couldn't form the intent necessary to commit intentional homicide. Brian's attorneys presented testimony suggesting his blood alcohol level had been 2 to 4 times the legal limit at the time of the murder. They argued he was too drunk to know what he was doing. During deliberations, the jury asked the judge twice for clarification on the voluntary intoxication issue and what constituted intent. The judge said he could offer no further guidance beyond the initial jury instructions. 2 jurors refused to convict Brian of murder. 1 juror, according to notes from the foreman, had withdrawn from the process entirely, doodling instead of participating and leaving to use the bathroom when confronted about her lack of engagement. The judge declared a hung jury on the homicide charges. Sherry Anichich walked out of that courtroom without speaking to anyone. She didn't talk to the press. She didn't talk to the prosecutor. She got in the car with her husband and said 5 words that would change the course of history. "We're changing this law." Sherry had just endured watching a man confess to murdering her daughter and granddaughter in excruciating detail. She'd heard him describe strangling Alicia while Alicia begged for her baby's life. She'd heard about the sexual assault. She'd seen the evidence of his obsession, his hidden cameras, his deliberate planning. And now she was being told that 2 jurors believed he was too drunk to be held responsible. Sherry refused to accept this. Being drunk, she believed, was no excuse for murder. She was determined to make sure no other family would have to endure what hers was enduring. With help from family and friends, Sherry began a campaign. She wrote letters to Wisconsin legislators. She started online petitions that gathered thousands of signatures. She met with lawmakers, telling them Alicia's story, explaining why the voluntary intoxication defense was fundamentally unjust. In her letter to legislators, Sherry wrote, "The first trial was never a trial to see if Cooper committed these murderous acts, but a trial to see if he was too drunk to form intent. Although he used his level of intoxication as a defense, I never imagined that any level-headed individual could find Cooper was too drunk to form intent. Being drunk is no excuse for murder." Investigator Mark Winkle, who had worked the case, was equally stunned by the hung jury. "I have to be honest with you. That didn't appear to be the case here because he was able to recall the crime in such detail. He said, step by step with detail and what was going through his head at the time. Sherry's campaign gained momentum. The media covered her story. People across Wisconsin and beyond were moved by her determination and outraged by the law that had prevented justice for Alicia. In April of 2014, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker signed a new law eliminating voluntary intoxication as a defense for intentional crimes. Sherry Anichit had done it. She had changed the law, but in a cruel twist of fate, the new law couldn't be applied to Brian Cooper's case because his crime had occurred before the law was passed. He was grandfathered in. He could still use the voluntary intoxication defense at his second trial. Sherry would have to endure another trial. She would have to hear all the graphic details again, see the photos again, watch her family be torn apart again, but she refused to give up. Brian Cooper's second trial began in May of 2014, almost 2 years after Alicia's murder. Before jury selection, Sherry wrote an impassioned letter to District Attorney Ray Pelrine. Please go up there and fight like this is your own daughter, she begged him. The prosecution presented the same evidence as before. Brian's detailed confession, the 911 call, the hidden cameras, the pattern of harassment and obsession. Wedding guests testified about Brian's level of intoxication that night, with some saying he seemed drunk and others saying he appeared relatively sober. Brian took the stand in his own defense, just as he had in the first trial. He testified about how much he'd drunk, about his state of mind, about his feelings for Alicia. The judge played the video that showed Brian setting up the hidden camera on the bathroom trash can before the murder. Judge D. Todd Ehlers made a powerful observation. What I realized as I watched that during the first trial and I watched during the second trial is that that's the last view that Alicia Bramfield had as you were strangling the life out of her. She looked up into your eyes, just like you were looking into that garbage can. And that just sends chills to me to the point that that is the last thing she saw. After 5 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for nearly 3 hours. When they returned, they had reached a verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Guilty of murdering Alicia Bramfield and Ava Lucille. Sherry Anichit cried for 30 minutes. She shook so hard she couldn't stand up. This man will never hurt anybody again, she said. Brian Cooper was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murders. He received an additional 4 years for the sexual assault charge. He was ordered to pay more than $8,000 in restitution to help cover funeral expenses. At sentencing, Judge Ehlers cited several troubling factors. He noted Brian's use of spy cameras to record Alicia both in Door County and at his home in Plainfield. He noted that Brian had used Alicia's birthday as his cell phone password, another sign of his obsession. And he noted the forensic pathologist's description of what had been done to Alicia's body. I consider, Mr. Cooper, the severity of the whole offense, not just the strangulation but the assault you imposed on the body of Alicia Bramfield, to be an extremely troubling factor, the judge said. Brian read a written statement and 2 poems he'd written. He said he and Alicia had enjoyed eating together, taking work trips, and watching the television show 24 together. He added, along with all the remorse, regret, and shame that streams down through my veins each and every day, I have come to the assumption that there are really no words I can truly say to express how sorry I am. That such tragedy did happen, and the fact that I did cause the death of Alicia and Ava Bramfield. The judge noted that Brian's statement lacked a direct apology to Alicia's family. Alicia's mother and other family members spoke about the effect of her death. The emotional pain is difficult to describe unless you've lost a child, Sherry said. In August of 2017, Brian appealed his conviction. The appeal was denied. He remains in prison, where he will spend the rest of his life. Sherry Anichit could have stopped after the conviction. She'd achieved justice for Alicia. She'd changed the law in Wisconsin. But Sherry didn't stop. The law she'd fought to change in Wisconsin inspired similar changes across the country. 31 additional states followed Wisconsin's lead and eliminated or restricted the use of voluntary intoxication as a defense for intentional crimes. 32 states total changed their laws because of Alicia's case, because of Sherry's advocacy. But Sherry wanted to do more. She established the Purple Project, an organization dedicated to supporting single young mothers and providing grief counseling to parents who have lost children to murder. Through the Purple Project, Sherry transformed her unimaginable grief into a force for positive change, helping others navigate situations similar to what Alicia had faced and supporting families destroyed by violence. Sherry also pursued a civil lawsuit against Home Depot and Grand Flower Growers. She believed these companies bore some responsibility for Alicia's death. They had employed Brian Cooper knowing about his harassment of female employees. They'd known about his violent outbursts. They'd ordered him to take anger management classes but never followed up when he didn't complete them. They'd given him supervisory authority over Alicia and never adequately protected her from his abuse of that authority. A trial judge initially dismissed the lawsuit, ruling that the companies had no duty to control their supervisor after work hours. But Sherry appealed. In March of 2017, United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit reversed the dismissal and remanded the case back to trial court. In a scathing opinion, Judge David Hamilton wrote, "Every life lost to brutality is unique. Each family's hell a private one. We do not diminish that truth. When we repeat that Alicia's story is an old story that has been told too many times. Its ending is both shocking and predictable. Alicia's family is entitled to try to prove its truth." The appeals court rejected Home Depot's minimization of Brian's behavior as merely being rude and mean to inanimate objects. The court noted that Home Depot's counsel had characterized the trip to the wedding as a date, and said the company had described Brian as having made a few mistakes. Judge Hamilton was clearly appalled by this characterization. He wrote, "Anyone who saw Cooper throw a fit in the parking lot could have easily concluded that Cooper either was dangerous because he had lost control of himself, or was trying to frighten Alicia." The court explained that while Brian wasn't on the company's premises when he killed Alicia, and he didn't use their property, he used something else the defendants gave him: supervisory authority over Alicia. He threatened to fire her or reduce her hours if she didn't go to his sister's wedding. He could only make those threats because Home Depot and Gran had made him her supervisor. Let's take a moment to remember who Alicia Bramfield was before she became a true crime story. She was a daughter who called her mother from Wisconsin to say there had been a fight, trusting that her mother would understand and support her. She was a student who'd worked since she was 16 years old while pursuing 2 demanding college degrees simultaneously, just 1 semester away from graduation. She was a friend who confided her fears to her coworkers, who told them she was scared but felt she had no choice. She was an expectant mother who'd already chosen a name for her daughter, Ava Lucille, who was preparing to raise her baby alone with courage and determination. She was 21 years old. Alicia's obituary lists her survivors: her parents, Sherry Anichich and James Heisner, and her 4 siblings, Brione Anichich, Luke Anichich, Chase Heisner, and Colton Heisner. Her funeral service was held on August 25th, 2012 at Holy Family Catholic Church. She was buried at Mary Cemetery in Mokena, Illinois, but Alicia's legacy extends far beyond her grave. Because of what happened to her, and because of her mother's tireless advocacy, 32 states changed their laws. Defendants across America can no longer hide behind voluntary intoxication as an excuse for intentional violence. The Purple Project continues to help single mothers and grieving parents. And perhaps most importantly, Alicia's story serves as a reminder of the importance of workplace protections, of believing women when they report harassment, of taking action when employees display warning signs of violence. Multiple people saw Brian Cooper's behavior and recognized it as dangerous. Alicia reported his harassment. Other employees witnessed his violent outbursts. But the systems that should have protected her failed. The anger management classes that were ordered were never completed or followed up on. The complaints that were made were not adequately addressed. Alicia told her friends she needed to keep her job. She was pregnant, visibly pregnant, and she knew another employer was unlikely to hire her. She knew she needed the income to support Ava, so she endured the harassment. She went on the trip to Wisconsin even though she didn't want to go. She tried to manage the situation to get through it, to survive until she could graduate and start her career. She should have been protected. She should have been safe. She should be alive today, raising Ava, working in the field of forensic psychology and criminal justice she loved so much. The Seventh Circuit's opinion included a powerful observation that speaks to how common this situation truly is. Alicia's story is an old story that has been told too many times. How many other Alicias are out there right now? How many young women are enduring harassment from supervisors, feeling trapped because they need their jobs, hoping they can just manage the situation until things get better? Sherianishich, through her incredible heartbreak, had a message for those women and for all of us. Stand up and make a difference. You can help another family not go through the pain and the nightmare that our family is going through still. If you see someone being harassed at work, speak up. If you witness threatening behavior, report it. If someone confides in you that they're scared of their boss, believe them and help them find resources. And if you're in a situation like Alicia was, please know that your life is worth more than any job. Reach out for help. Talk to human resources. Or if they won't listen, talk to a lawyer. Document everything. And please, trust your instincts. If something feels dangerous, it probably is. Alicia Bramfield deserved better. Ava Lucille deserved a chance at life. And while we cannot change what happened to them, we can honor their memory by working to ensure no one else suffers the same fate. As you drift off to sleep tonight, hold space in your heart for Alicia and Ava. Remember them not just as victims of a terrible crime, but as symbols of why workplace safety matters, why we must believe and protect vulnerable employees, and why one mother's determination to change unjust laws can ripple out to protect countless others. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight we're going to look into a story that matters. A story about a young woman whose life was cut short, and the investigation that brought her killer to justice. This is the story of Phoenix Nets. We're going back to the spring of 2020, to a time when the world was quiet, locked down, holding its breath. Phoenix Nets was born on the 4th of August, 1991 in Croydon, a borough in South London where city meets suburb, where terraced houses line streets that have seen generations come and go. She was the daughter of Mark and Saskia Nets, parents who loved her deeply, who watched her grow with pride and hope. As a child, Phoenix attended Parish Church Junior School in Croydon, where she was known as a bright, clever girl. Her aunt would later remember her as lovely and sweet-natured. Her father would tell family members proudly about how intelligent she was, how much potential she had. Phoenix loved horses. She was a keen rider in her youth, spending hours at stables, learning to care for these magnificent animals, finding peace in their company. She also loved drama, drawn to the creativity and expression it offered. At school she did well, showing promise, showing that brightness her father spoke of. When she was old enough, Phoenix went to university. She enrolled at Canterbury Christchurch University in 2009. With dreams of becoming a paramedic, she wanted to help people. She wanted to save lives. For 2 years, she studied in Canterbury, that ancient city with its cathedral and cobblestone streets, trying to build the foundation for the future she imagined. But life, as it so often does, took unexpected turns. Phoenix struggled. She battled with mental health issues that made everything harder. She experimented with drugs, first marijuana, then acid, cocaine, MDMA, searching perhaps for relief, for escape, for something she couldn't name. Her relationship with her parents became strained after their separation. The foundation she'd been building began to crack. She left university before completing her degree. The dream of becoming a paramedic faded. At least for now, Phoenix moved around, trying to find her footing. She had relationships that didn't work out. She moved from London to Birmingham to be with someone, to start fresh. When that relationship ended, she found herself adrift again. But Phoenix wasn't giving up. In late 2019 or early 2020, she moved into a women's refuge in Lozells, a neighborhood in West Birmingham. These refuges exist as safe spaces, places where women can stay when they need shelter, when they need to escape difficult circumstances, when they need time to rebuild. Phoenix was trying to rebuild. At 28 years old, she was planning her next chapter. She was thinking about moving back to London, back to her parents, back to the familiar streets of Croydon. She talked to her friends about it. She was making plans. Her future, as the judge would later say, was looking bright, shining, and promising. A fresh start was ahead of her. She had no way of knowing that someone else had very different plans. Eureka Conita Gordon moved into the women's refuge in Los Ells around early 2020, maybe 6 months before everything fell apart. She was 28 years old, the same age as Phoenix. She'd been born in Jamaica and had moved to England when she was 7, living first with an aunt before her mother joined her. Gordon's mother would later describe her daughter in haunting terms, calling her a ticking time bomb. She would say Gordon wasn't a bad person at heart, but those words spoken after the unthinkable carried the weight of a mother who'd seen warning signs, who'd perhaps feared what her daughter might be capable of. Psychological assessments would later reveal that Gordon had a personality disorder. She had a low tolerance for frustration. She struggled intensely with perceived rejection, unable to process it, unable to accept it. These weren't excuses. The courts would make clear. Gordon's reality wasn't distorted. She knew what she was doing. But understanding the psychology helps us understand what happened next. When Gordon moved into the refuge, she lived next door to Phoenix. The two women met, and at first they became friends. Phoenix, with her kind and calm nature, took Gordon under her wing. They talked. They shared the small intimacies of daily life and shared accommodation. They became close, but for Gordon, friendship wasn't enough. She developed feelings, sexual feelings, feelings that Phoenix didn't share. And when Phoenix made it clear that she wasn't interested in that kind of relationship, Gordon didn't accept it. In February of 2020, Phoenix confided in a friend. Gordon had demanded sex with her, Phoenix said. When Phoenix refused, Gordon became aggressive. The friend listened, concerned, but perhaps not yet alarmed. These things happen, people think. It'll blow over, but it didn't blow over. It escalated. On April 7th, Phoenix sent a text message to a friend. The message was casual in tone, but carried an undercurrent of real fear. She wrote, "There's a girl here who keeps asking me to be sexual. I think I'm going to move back to London. It's scaring me, lol." That lola at the end, that little laugh out loud, was Phoenix trying to make light of something that genuinely frightened her. It's what we do sometimes when we're scared, but don't want to worry others, or don't want to seem overdramatic, or don't yet fully believe the danger we're in. Phoenix made plans to return to London, to move in with her parents. She talked about it with friends. She was going home. She was getting out. Gordon knew Phoenix was planning to leave. And for Gordon, with her inability to handle rejection, with that ticking time bomb her own mother had described, Phoenix's planned departure was intolerable. April 16th, 2020. It was a Thursday. The United Kingdom was in lockdown because of the coronavirus pandemic. The streets were quiet. People stayed home. The world felt suspended, waiting. Phoenix's last known contact with the outside world was a phone call with a friend in the early hours of that morning. They talked. Everything seemed normal. When the friend tried to call back that afternoon, Phoenix didn't answer. She would never answer again. Sometime that day, Gordon invited herself into Phoenix's room. Or perhaps Phoenix invited her in, not knowing what was about to happen. We know from another woman living in the shared accommodation that she heard sounds that afternoon, shouts. The words, help me, piercing through walls, then drilling sounds, banging. Gordon stabbed Phoenix 4 times in the torso. The wounds were serious, but here's what makes this even more chilling. Phoenix could have survived. If Gordon had called for help, if she dialed 999, if an ambulance had arrived, Phoenix wouldn't have died from those stab wounds. But Gordon didn't call anyone. She left Phoenix to bleed out in her room while she did something else entirely. She went online. She started searching. Between 1:04 in the afternoon and 3:07, Phoenix's phone was used to conduct internet searches. How to fix punctured lung, internal bleeding. Can someone recover from getting stabbed? These weren't searches made out of concern. They were searches to assess whether Phoenix might survive without help. And when Gordon determined that Phoenix would likely die, she simply waited. She let Phoenix bleed. She let her die alone, in pain, calling for help that never came. Phoenix Nets died on April 16th. 2020. She was 28 years old. She'd been planning to go home. Some killers panic after committing murder. They flee, they turn themselves in, they break down. Gordon did none of these things. Instead, she set about covering up her crime with a level of calculation that would shock even hardened police investigators. The next morning, April 17th, a circular saw was delivered to the refuge. Gordon had purchased it the day before on Gumtree, a classified ads website, for £45. The delivery arrived shortly before 11 in the morning. Phoenix's body was either fully clothed or partially clothed. When Gordon used that saw to dismember her, the post-mortem examination would later determine that dismemberment took place at 5 different locations on the body, dividing it into 6 parts. Think about what that means. Think about the cold calculation required. Gordon wasn't in a blind rage anymore. She was methodical, precise. She had work to do, and she did it. But Gordon's plan was more intricate than just disposing of the body. She needed people to believe Phoenix was still alive. So she took Phoenix's phone and began a campaign of deception that would last for weeks. She sent text messages to Phoenix's family and friends, pretending to be her. She sent emails. But Gordon went even further than that. She downloaded an audio editing application, software that allowed her to manipulate voice recordings. She used it to alter her own voice to sound more like Phoenix's. Then send voice messages to Phoenix's loved ones. Imagine receiving a voice message from your daughter, your friend, hearing her voice telling you she's fine. She's moved to London. She's doing well. Everything's okay. You'd believe it, wouldn't you? You'd have no reason not to. Gordon searched the internet for other things too. How do killers get caught, she wanted to know. Can a body burn to ashes with petrol? She was planning ahead, trying to stay ahead of any investigation. She bought 2 suitcases, large ones. She packed Phoenix's dismembered body into them, sealing away the evidence of her crime. The Forest of Dean is one of England's ancient woodlands, spreading across 44 square miles between the rivers Severn and Wye, near the border between England and Wales. It's a place of oak and beech trees, of quiet trails and hidden clearings, of history stretching back to the Iron Age. Gordon chose the Forest of Dean as the place to dispose of Phoenix's body. It's about 80 miles from Birmingham, far enough to create distance, remote enough to offer concealment. She made multiple trips there over the coming weeks. She took trains, she booked cars through Gumtree. She carried those 2 suitcases, heavy with their terrible contents, through stations and into vehicles. And somehow no one noticed, or if they did, they didn't say anything. In the Forest of Dean, Gordon found spots to hide the suitcases. At one point, she hid them in Handsworth Cemetery, back in Birmingham, for several days before moving them. She attempted to burn Phoenix's remains in the woodland, trying to destroy the evidence completely. She poured petrol on the body parts and set them alight, but burning a human body completely is nearly impossible without specialized equipment. The fire charred the remains, damaged them, but didn't destroy them. Gordon must have realized this, must have seen that her plan wasn't working as she'd hoped. On May 12th, 2020, Gordon hired a driver to take her to the Forest of Dean again. She had the 2 suitcases with her. According to police, she was planning to move the remains into Wales, to burn them further, to finally complete the disposal she'd been working on for weeks. But then something happened that Gordon hadn't planned for. Something random, something lucky. If you believe in luck, or providential if you believe in that. Someone noticed. It was late at night on May 12th. Around 10:30 in the evening, a member of the public was driving on the A4136 road near Colford in the Forest of Dean when they noticed a car being driven erratically. In ordinary times, they might have just driven past, might have thought the driver was tired or lost. But these weren't ordinary times. The UK was in strict lockdown. People weren't supposed to be out, unless absolutely necessary. Seeing a car being driven strangely in a remote area late at night raised suspicions. The witness called the police. Officers from Gloucestershire Constabulary responded, locating the vehicle a short time later. They spoke with 2 people, a man in his 30s from Wolverhampton, named Mahesh Sarathia, and a woman in her 20s from Birmingham. The woman was Garika Gordon. The officers checked the car's registration and found it was registered to an address in Wolverhampton. Something felt off about the situation. Why were these people out here in the middle of a forest late at night during lockdown? They asked Gordon and Sarathia to step out of the vehicle. Near the car, close to the entrance of Stovefield Quarry, they noticed two large suitcases. The officers asked what was in them. Gordon tried to push the officers away when they moved toward the suitcases. She didn't want them to look inside. The officers thought perhaps there were drugs or stolen property in the luggage. They opened one of the suitcases anyway. What they found was a partially burned human torso. Detective Chief Inspector John Turner would later recall that the officers were really shocked. They were looking at dismembered human remains, charred and disturbing, stuffed into luggage in the middle of the woods. Gordon's response was strange, chilling in its casualness. When she was arrested in caution, she said, "Sorry guys, I didn't want you to see that. Not I didn't do it. Not this isn't what it looks like. Just an apology for the officers having to witness what she'd done." Both Gordon and Sarathia were arrested on suspicion of murder. The suitcases were seized. The vehicle was taken for examination, and thus began one of the most intensive investigations Gloucestershire and West Midlands police had ever conducted. The Forest of Dean became a crime scene. Police helicopters circled overhead. Forensic teams combed through the woodland. The A4136 was closed between Monmouth and Colford. Officers searched Stovefield Quarry in the village of Staunton, but they didn't know who the victim was. Not yet. The remains were too badly burned, too damaged for visual identification. They would need DNA testing. They would need dental records. They would need time. Meanwhile, Gordon and Sarathia were taken into custody for questioning. Initially, they received a 12-hour custody extension, then another 36 hours. The investigators needed time to build their case, to understand what had happened. On May 15th, 3 days after the discovery, police conducted a post-mortem examination. It was inconclusive. The burning had made determining the exact cause of death difficult. Further examinations would be needed. That same day, police began searching properties in Wolverhampton and Birmingham. They needed to find where this person had been killed, where they'd been dismembered. Their investigation led them to a women's refuge in Lozells, Birmingham. The DNA test came back. The remains belonged to a 28-year-old woman named Phoenix Netz. Now the investigators had a name. Now they could piece together what had happened. The investigation shifted from Gloucestershire Constabulary to West Midlands Police. As it became clear Phoenix had been murdered in Birmingham, not in the Forest of Dean, detectives descended on the refuge where Phoenix had lived. They examined her room, finding that the bed, mattress, carpet, and underlay had all been removed. But blood staining was discovered in the living area. In the kitchen, in the shower, someone had tried to clean up but hadn't been thorough enough. They found the circular saw in Gordon's room, still bearing evidence of what it had been used for. They found handwritten plans and notes about removing the body from Colford and moving it to Wales to burn it further. They examined hours and hours of CCTV footage, tracking Gordon's movements for around a month prior to the discovery. They watched her make numerous trips to Colford by car and by train. They watched her take 2 suitcases from the refuge to Handsworth Cemetery, where she hid them for several days. They watched her move through train stations, through streets, carrying death and luggage while the world went about its business. They analyzed Phoenix's phone records and found all those messages, all those emails, all those voice recordings Gordon had sent, pretending to be Phoenix. The voice editing app was still on the phone. They interviewed the other woman living in the accommodation, who confirmed hearing the shouts for help, the drilling, the banging on April 16th. The case against Gordon was overwhelming. The evidence was everywhere, but there was still the question of Mahesh Sarathia, the man who'd been with Gordon when she was arrested. What was his role? After investigation, police determined that Sarathia had agreed to drive Gordon to the Forest of Dean, but hadn't known what was in the suitcases. He'd been charged with assisting an offender, but on November 10th, 2020, all charges against him were dropped. He'd been used by Gordon, unwittingly drawn into her plan without understanding what he was helping with. Gordon, however, had no such defense. She knew exactly what she'd done. For nearly a year, Gordon prepared for trial. She was held at HM Prison Eastwood Park. The trial date was set for late April 2021. Phoenix's family waited for their day in court, waited to hear why their daughter had been taken from them. But then, days before the trial was scheduled to begin, Gordon changed her plea. On April 21st, 2021, she appeared via video link from prison before Bristol Crown Court. She confirmed her identity, and she pleaded guilty to murdering Phoenix Nets between April 14th and May 12th, 2020. It meant Phoenix's family wouldn't have to endure a trial, wouldn't have to hear every detail recounted in open court. But it also meant they'd get answers. Closure. Justice. The sentencing hearing took place on May 4th, 2021. Prosecutor Andrew Smith, QC, laid out the facts of the case for the court. He explained how Gordon had demanded a sexual relationship, how Phoenix had refused, how Gordon had become aggressive. He described the text messages Phoenix had sent to friends revealing her fear. He detailed the stabbing, the waiting, the dismemberment, the elaborate cover-up. He read victim impact statements from Phoenix's parents, Mark and Saskia. Mark spoke of how their lives had been irreversibly changed, how the anguish was indescribable. Saskia described herself as forever devastated, forever empty. They spoke of their profound loss, of losing a daughter they'd expected to share the next chapter of life with. The pain wasn't just about Phoenix's death. They explained. It was exacerbated by knowing the manner of her death, by knowing that someone had impersonated her, had sent them messages in her voice while she was already gone, had made them believe she was alive and well when she was already dead. Gordon's own mother didn't testify, but court filings included her description of Gordon as a ticking time bomb. She insisted her daughter wasn't a bad person at heart. But the words rang hollow against the magnitude of what Gordon had done. Defense attorneys presented psychological assessments showing Gordon had a personality disorder, low tolerance for frustration, difficulty with rejection. But High Court Judge Mrs. Justice Cutts made clear these factors might explain Gordon's actions in part, but they hadn't distorted her reality. Gordon had known what she was doing. She'd been calculating, methodical, fully aware. Justice Cutts addressed Gordon directly during sentencing. She spoke of Phoenix as a lovely, caring, compassionate woman who was deeply loved. She noted that Phoenix had intended to move back to live with her parents, that her future had been looking bright and promising. A fresh start was ahead of her, Justice Cutts said. You robbed her of that fresh start. You took her from the supportive parents who loved and cherished her. The judge described Gordon as wicked, callous, and a very dangerous young woman. The deliberate refusal to get medical help for Phoenix, allowing her to die slowly when she could have survived, showed a level of cruelty that couldn't be overlooked. The sentence was life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23 years and 6 months. Gordon would be eligible for parole after that, but there was no guarantee she'd ever be released. If she was released, she'd remain on license for the rest of her life. Detective Superintendent Scott Griffiths of West Midlands Police spoke to the media afterward. He described the case as extremely distressing for everyone involved, especially Phoenix's loved ones. He praised the officers who'd worked on it, noting how shocking even hardened investigators had found the discovery of Phoenix's dismembered body. She went to great lengths to pretend Phoenix was still alive and had moved out of the area. Griffiths said, as well as great efforts to dispose of her body, hoping her despicable crime would go unnoticed. He added that he genuinely believed if officers hadn't found Gordon that night in the Forest of Dean, they would never have found Phoenix's body. Gordon's devious plot might have worked. Phoenix might have simply disappeared. Another missing person. Another unsolved case. Her family never knowing what happened. But the random chance of someone noticing an erratically driven car. The decision of that witness to call police. The officer's curiosity about those suitcases. All of it came together to bring Phoenix home. To bring her family answers. To bring her killer to justice. Detective Chief Inspector John Turner of Gloucestershire Police described Gordon as cold and evasive when she spoke to officers. When they'd asked about the suitcases, she tried to push them away. When they'd opened them anyway, her apology had been bizarre, inappropriate, revealed. From what we were looking at, Turner said, it was clear we were dealing with a very devious person. Phoenix's family released a statement after the sentencing. They thanked all the police officers from all the forces involved, especially West Midlands Police. They acknowledged their families, close friends, neighbors, and Phoenix's friends for their support during the terrible year since her death. They wanted to make something clear. Phoenix was entirely blameless. I hope that this is now clear to everyone. She was the victim of a senseless act of violence, which ended her life at a young age. She was greatly loved by her family, and we cared for her very much. Phoenix Nets was born on August 4th, 1991. and died on April 16, 2020. She lived 28 years. Not nearly long enough. Not nearly enough time to accomplish all the things she'd hoped to accomplish. To become all the things she'd hoped to become. She was a daughter. She was a friend. She was someone who loved horses and drama and the Louis Theroux documentaries. She was someone who dreamed of becoming a paramedic, of saving lives. She was someone who struggled, as so many of us do, with mental health and difficult circumstances, and trying to find her place in the world. She was someone who tried to be kind, who took Gordon under her wing when Gordon first moved into the refuge. She was someone who, when faced with unwanted advances, tried to handle it calmly, tried to extricate herself from the situation, tried to go home. Her aunt remembered her as lovely and sweet-natured. Her father spoke proudly of how clever she was. Her mother described the devastation, the emptiness that would never fully heal. The judge said Phoenix's future had been looking bright, shining and promising. We'll never know what that future would have held. We'll never know the person she might have become, the lives she might have touched, the contributions she might have made. What we do know is this: Phoenix Nets mattered. Her life had value. Her death was not in vain, because her story has been told. Her killer has been held accountable, and her memory has been honored. In the women's refuges across the United Kingdom, in the United States, around the world, there are thousands of women trying to rebuild their lives, trying to find safety, trying to start again. Phoenix was one of them. She was trying so hard. The tragedy of her death reminds us that these spaces, meant to be safe, must truly be safe. That we must listen when someone says they're scared. That we must take seriously the warning signs, the concerning behaviors, the escalating situation. If Phoenix's story can help save even one life, if it can encourage even one person to speak up, to get help, to take action before it's too late, then her death will have meaning beyond the senselessness of how it occurred. Rest in peace, Phoenix Nets. You were loved. You are remembered. You deserved so much more than what happened to you, but you are not forgotten. Your name was Phoenix, like the mythical bird that rises from ashes, symbolizing rebirth and renewal. Though you did not get to rise again in this life, your story lives on. Your memory endures, and that, at least, no one can take away. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. Let me tell you a story tonight. One that unfolds slowly, carefully, like the pages of a book turning in the quiet hours. This is a story about transformation and tragedy, about the masks we wear and the secrets we keep. So adjust your pillow, close your eyes if you'd like, and let me guide you through the haunting case of Anthony Milan Ross. Take a deep breath. Tonight, we walk together through the shadows of a Christmas that ended in heartbreak. In the early 2010s, a man named Anthony Milan Ross was becoming a familiar face in Phoenix, Arizona. He went by his middle name, Milan, and he had a story that resonated with thousands of people. It was a story of transformation, of hope, of a man who had conquered his demons and emerged victorious. Milan Ross had once weighed over 500 pounds. Think about that for a moment. The weight of his struggles, both physical and emotional, had nearly consumed him. He was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, in a family where obesity was common. Food was comfort. Food was celebration. Food was everything. But for Milan, food had become a prison. In 2012, Milan was working at Whole Foods Market in Phoenix. He had moved there years earlier, leaving behind his past in Missouri. The job provided something his family desperately needed: health insurance. His family had been facing medical bills, mounting expenses that threatened to drown them. So Milan walked away from his passion, music, and took a position stocking shelves, making salads, doing whatever was needed. But it was at Whole Foods that Milan's life took a turn. The company offered its employees something unusual: a week-long health immersion program led by Dr. Scott Stoll. was meant for those who needed it most. Those who were struggling. Milan applied, and he was accepted. That week changed everything, or so it seemed. During the 7-day program, Milan learned about plant-based nutrition, about whole foods, about the power of veganism to transform not just the body, but the entire life. He listened to Dr. Stoll's teachings with the fervor of a convert. He embraced the lifestyle completely, absolutely, without reservation, and the weight began to fall away. 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 50 pounds, 100 pounds. The transformation was dramatic, stunning, almost miraculous. Over the course of his journey, Milan Ross lost more than 225 pounds. Some reports say it was closer to 300 pounds. His body changed. His face changed. He became unrecognizable from the man he had been. Milan documented everything. He took photographs, before and after images that showed two completely different people. He wrote about his journey. He started a blog. He began speaking at events. His message was simple and powerful. You can change no matter how far gone you think you are. No matter how hopeless it seems. You can transform yourself. The story spread. Milan Ross appeared on the cover of Vegan Lifestyle magazine, his arm around his young son Nigel. Both were smiling, radiant with health and happiness. He was featured in articles. He appeared on local television programs like Good Morning Arizona. He was interviewed at food festivals, speaking about his cookbook, his mission, his new life. He even appeared in a feature-length documentary about veganism, alongside celebrities like James Cameron and Samuel L. Jackson. Milan Ross was becoming exactly what he'd always wanted to be, a celebrity, someone people recognized, someone who mattered. He wrote a book called The Change, Transforming Yourself and Your Body into the Person You Want to Be. In it, he told his story in intimate detail, describing the week that changed his life, sharing the wisdom of Dr. Stoll, offering hope to anyone who struggled with their weight. He launched his own brand, Full Flavor Vegan. He developed an organic health food line. His website proclaimed his mission, to help others escape the deadly hold of obesity, to educate people about the amazing benefits of living a compassionate, whole food, plant-based lifestyle. He gave talks across the United States. People came to hear him speak, drawn by his charisma, his passion, his transformation. He spoke of healing through food, of redemption, of second chances. To the outside world, Milan Ross was living proof that anyone could change their life. He seemed happy, successful, fulfilled. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Something darker. What Milan Ross never talked about in his interviews, what he never mentioned in his book or his speeches, was that he had done this before. The transformation, the new life, the fresh start. He had done it by leaving everything behind. In 2003, Milan Ross had a family in Missouri, a wife named Nicole, and 4 daughters, Shalonda, Ebony, and their 2 younger sisters. They were his first family. The family he never mentioned, the family he kept secret. One day, Milan simply disappeared. He left Missouri, left his wife, left his 4 young daughters. He didn't say goodbye, didn't explain, didn't leave a forwarding address. He just vanished like smoke dissipating in the wind. Nicole Ross tried to find him. She searched. She made earnest, diligent attempts to locate the father of her children, but Anthony Milan Ross didn't want to be found. He had moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and he had started over, completely, totally, as if his first family had never existed. In 2008, 5 years after he left, Nicole Ross filed for divorce in St. Louis. The divorce papers noted that her attempts to locate him had been unsuccessful. He was gone, and he wanted to stay gone. By then, Milan had already met someone new, a woman named Iris Sutherland. She was ambitious, driven, warm-hearted, the kind of person who would go out of her way to make your day better. As her sister would later recall, Iris had a passion for life that was infectious. She worked as an administrator at a medical center. She was building a career, building a life. Milan and Iris married in 2009. They started a family. They had a son, Nigel, who was born with his father's charisma and his mother's warmth. Nigel was a performer, the kind of kid with a big personality who loved being on stage. Then came a daughter, Honora, a baby girl with her whole life ahead of her. To the world, Milan and Iris seemed like the perfect family. The after photo. The happy ending, but Iris's roommate and friend, Lashanya Echeverria, would later reveal that Iris discovered the truth. Somewhere between 4 and 7 years into their marriage, Iris found out about Milan's hidden past, about the wife and 4 daughters he'd abandoned in Missouri. The discovery shattered Iris. Not just the fact that Milan had been married before, but that he had abandoned them, that he had 4 daughters who grew up without their father, that he had kept this enormous secret from her all these years. As Echeverria explained, Iris felt the real breach wasn't just the secret itself, but that she hadn't been given a choice. If she had known, she might have made different decisions about her life. Eventually, Milan's 2 eldest daughters from his first marriage came forward. Shalonda Ross and Ebony Shanice Ross were willing to tell their truth. They spoke about what it had been like growing up with Anthony Milan Ross as a father, and their stories painted a very different picture from the one he presented to the world. Shalonda, the eldest, described abuse. She talked about being punched, choked, slapped by her father. She spoke of having to stay home from school until the bruises faded, until the evidence of violence was no longer visible. Even years later, she still had nightmares about those days. Ebony, the second daughter, talked about food. How ironic, she noted, that their father had become famous for teaching others about healthy eating, about healing through food, because for Ebony and her sisters, food had been a weapon, a tool of torture. She described a punishment that lasted an entire year. Milan would lock them in their room. Their bathroom breaks were limited. Their time outside was controlled. And their food was restricted to butter and sugar rice, every single day, for a year. Meanwhile, Milan would cook other foods, elaborate meals with rich smells, and he would blow the aroma in their faces, taunting them with what they couldn't have. Both daughters said they were kept as secrets. Dark, dirty secrets, as Ebony put it. Their father had run from his past, leaving them behind like unwanted baggage. When Iris discovered this history, when she perhaps spoke with these young women and heard their stories, it may have been the final push she needed. She filed for divorce in June of 2017, 6 months before Christmas. The divorce was devastating for Milan Ross. Not because he was losing Iris necessarily, but because he was losing everything his marriage to Iris represented. Prosecutors would later argue that Milan Ross was obsessed with celebrity, with status, with being recognized and admired. His entire identity was wrapped up in his public image. The successful vegan chef, the motivational speaker, the author, the man who had transformed his life. But the reality was different. The success was a facade. The money wasn't really there. Milan was depending on Iris's income to maintain the lifestyle he craved. She was the one with the stable job, the steady paycheck. Without her, the whole carefully constructed image began to crumble. As the prosecutor would later say, his 5 minutes of daytime TV fame was up. The money, the success, all a facade. And so was the perfect family. After the divorce filing, Milan's behavior became increasingly erratic. Iris's sister, Mary Wogas, said Milan was acting strangely, threatening. Iris told her sister she was worried, but she never thought Milan would hurt their children. That was unthinkable. Whatever problems existed between Iris and Milan, surely their love for Nigel and Honora would protect the children. The divorce was finalized in September 2017. Iris and Milan had joint custody of the children, but friends said Iris was considering fighting for sole custody. Perhaps the conversations with Milan's abandoned daughters had convinced her that her children weren't safe. Or perhaps she simply knew her ex-husband better than anyone else. In the months leading up to Christmas, Milan Ross was searching the internet. His search history, which would later be presented in court, revealed his state of mind. He searched for firearms, for silencers, for battery acid, sulfuric acid, skin-melting acid. He looked up information about disposing of evidence. And he searched for something else, something chilling. He looked up news stories about other families who had been murdered on Christmas Day. Milan's defense attorney would later argue that these searches were just ruminations, the obsessive thoughts of a man struggling with depression and insomnia. After all, Milan was also making plans for the future during this time. He had adopted a dog. He had proposed to a new girlfriend just 3 days before Christmas. He had written himself a check for his business on Christmas Eve. These were the actions of someone planning to continue living, weren't they? But the prosecution saw it differently. To them, the internet searches revealed premeditation, planning. A man who thought about what he was going to do, meant to do it, and then did it. Milan had also been talking to people, dropping hints. He told multiple people to expect something big on Christmas, something significant. He said it in a way that seemed strange at the time, but nobody quite understood what he meant. On Christmas Eve, 2017, Milan spent time with his children. Nigel and baby Honora were staying with him for the holiday, and Iris would pick them up the following day. Milan seemed to be in good spirits. He made a video with 11-year-old Nigel and posted it on social media. In the video, Milan is smiling, laughing. He says, "Hey guys, I'm smiling and I'm hanging out with Nigel on Christmas Eve, and we're about to embarrass ourselves. We're gonna sing." Then Milan and Nigel perform Santa Claus is Coming to Town together. Their voices blend in the cheerful holiday classic. Nigel is beaming, full of life and joy. The video ends with them wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. It was the last time anyone would see Nigel alive. The last time his voice would be heard. The last moment of innocence before everything shattered. Christmas morning arrived in Phoenix, Arizona. The sun rose over the desert city, bringing with it the promise of celebration, family, togetherness. For most people, it was a day of joy, of opening presents and sharing meals, of making memories. For Milan Ross, Christmas morning began with whiskey. According to his defense attorney, he woke up depressed and started drinking. By the afternoon, he had consumed half a bottle. He sent messages to Iris. The content of those messages would later be disputed. But it's clear that Milan was in a dark state of mind. At some point that morning, after the whiskey and the messages, Milan Ross made a decision, or perhaps the decision had already been made long ago. In those late night hours spent searching the internet for weapons and acid and stories of family annihilations. At approximately 2:52 in the afternoon, Mary Walgas, Iris's sister, received a text message from Milan. She looked at her phone and felt her blood run cold. The first message said, "I just killed Iris and the kids." A moment later, another message arrived, with a gun. Mary knew immediately that something terrible had happened. She knew Milan was unstable. She had seen his dark side, though perhaps she hadn't realized how deep that darkness went. She called the police. Meanwhile, at the Highland Apartments on 16th Street and Highland Avenue in Phoenix, witnesses were seeing something horrific unfold. Iris Ross had arrived to pick up her children. She pulled into the parking lot, probably thinking about the rest of their Christmas day. Maybe they would open presents at home. Maybe they would visit family. Whatever plans she had, they would never come to fruition. Milan met her outside. They talked, or maybe they argued. Witnesses couldn't hear the words, but they could see what happened next. Iris tried to run. She turned and fled, desperate to get away from Milan, from whatever was happening. Then Milan had a gun. He raised it and fired. The sound echoed across the parking lot. Iris fell. A witness approached, horrified. They asked Milan if Iris was okay. Milan looked at them and said simply, "No." Then he pointed the gun at the witness. A threat, a warning. "Stay back." The witness froze. Milan turned and walked back into his apartment. The witness heard 2 or 3 more gunshots from inside, sharp cracks that split the air. Then silence. Police arrived within minutes. They found Iris Ross's body on the front patio, lying motionless in a pool of blood. She had been shot as she tried to escape. She died on Christmas Day, trying to pick up her children from their father. The police quickly realized that Milan was still inside the apartment, and so were the children. Nigel, 11 years old, and Nora, only 10 months old, just a baby. What followed was a 6-hour standoff that would stretch into the night. The Phoenix Police Department surrounded the Highland Apartments. Officers established a perimeter. They brought in negotiators. They tried to make contact with Milan Ross. Milan was barricaded inside with his 2 children. The police didn't know the children's status. Were they alive? Were they injured? The uncertainty was agonizing. The negotiators talked to Milan for hours. They tried to build rapport to find some way to resolve the situation peacefully, but Milan kept changing his story. Sergeant Jonathan Howard would later describe how Milan would make contradictory statements. Sometimes he said the children were still alive. Sometimes he threatened to kill them if the police didn't leave. Other times he made comments that suggested he had already killed them. The police had to proceed carefully. Every decision carried enormous weight. If the children were still alive, a wrong move could end in tragedy. But if Milan had already killed them, then time was being wasted while a murderer remained free. As the afternoon turned to evening, the police deployed a robot into the apartment. The small machine moved through the rooms, sending back video footage. And then they found her, Honora Ross. The 10-month-old baby. She was dead, her small body lying still in one of the rooms. She had been shot. The discovery was devastating. But there was still one child unaccounted for. 11-year-old Nigel, the boy who had sung Santa Claus is Coming to Town with his father just hours earlier. The police continued their attempts to negotiate with Milan. But as the standoff wore on, it became clear that a peaceful resolution was unlikely. Milan was becoming increasingly erratic. The police made the decision to cut the power to the apartment, plunging it into darkness. At approximately 7:30 in the evening, a special assignments unit prepared to enter. They moved carefully, methodically. These were trained professionals who had done this before. But every situation was different. Every life mattered. As the officers breached the apartment, Milan Ross opened fire. The sound of gunshots filled the air. The officers returned fire, bullets flying in both directions in the darkened apartment. One officer, a 46-year-old man with 23 years of service to the Phoenix Police Department, was hit by shrapnel. He was injured but stable. The exchange lasted only moments, but it felt like an eternity, and then it was over. Milan Ross was taken into custody. He was alive, uninjured. He surrendered without further resistance. The officers secured the scene and began searching the rest of the apartment. And there, in another room, they found Nigel, 11 years old, the boy with the big personality who loved to perform, the boy who had sung Christmas carols with his father. He had been shot to death on Christmas Day by his own father. Outside the apartment, the sun had set. Christmas Day was ending. But for the families of Iris, Nigel, and Honora Ross, the nightmare was just beginning. Anthony Milan Ross was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He also faced 19 counts of aggravated assault on an officer, stemming from the shootout with police. The charges were filed the day after Christmas, but the case would not go to trial for years. Not for 1 year, or 2 or 3. It would be nearly 8 years before Milan Ross faced a jury for what he had done. Why did it take so long? David Black, a Phoenix criminal defense attorney not involved in the case, explained that this wasn't a simple matter. There were 3 deaths. It was a capital case, meaning the death penalty was on the table. There were mental health defenses being asserted, which required extensive evaluation by experts. And there was the shootout with police, adding layers of complexity. This wasn't a case that could be rushed through the system. So the years passed. Iris, Nigel, and Honora were buried. Their family grieved. Mary Wogas, Iris's sister, tried to explain to her own young son why Aunt Iris and his cousins were gone. How do you explain that to a child? How do you make sense of senseless violence? The public largely forgot about the case. Milan Ross's social media accounts remained frozen in time, still showing the cheerful Christmas Eve video. His books were still for sale. His image was still associated with health and transformation, even though he sat in jail awaiting trial for murdering his family. Finally, in September 2025, nearly 8 years after the murders, the trial began. The opening statements painted 2 very different pictures of what had happened and why. The prosecution, led by Maricopa County Prosecutor Richard Dusterhoff, described Milan Ross as vain and obsessed with celebrity status. They argued that he was financially dependent on Iris to maintain his lifestyle. When she filed for divorce, his carefully constructed world began to fall apart. The divorce meant losing not just his wife, but his image of the perfect family. It meant losing the financial support that allowed him to maintain his persona as a successful chef and motivational speaker. Dusterhoff presented the internet searches as evidence of premeditation. The searches for weapons, for acids, for news stories about family murders. He pointed to Milan's statement that people should expect something big on Christmas. He argued that Milan had planned the murders carefully, that he had thought about it before he did it, meant to do it, and then did it. The prosecution's theory was that this was revenge. Milan couldn't let Iris go. He couldn't let her take the children and the life they represented. If he couldn't have them, no one would. The defense, led by attorney Carrie Gallagher, presented a different narrative. She acknowledged that what happened was a tragedy, but argued that the prosecution had to prove premeditation for first-degree murder. She painted Milan as a man struggling with severe mental health issues in 2017. He had depression. He had insomnia, going days with poor sleep or even no sleep at all. Gallagher argued that the internet searches represented rumination, not concrete planning. She pointed to the future-oriented activities Milan was engaged in during the same period. He had proposed to his girlfriend 3 days before Christmas. He had adopted a dog with her. He had written himself a check for his business on Christmas Eve. These weren't the actions of someone planning to die or to spend the rest of his life in prison, she argued. On Christmas Day, according to the defense, Milan woke up depressed and intoxicated after drinking half a bottle of whiskey. He sent messages to Iris about their separation. What happened next, Gallagher suggested, was impulsive rather than planned. A tragedy born of a moment of darkness, not a calculated act of revenge. The trial stretched on for weeks. As witnesses testified, evidence was presented. The jury heard about Milan's weight loss journey, his public persona, his hidden past with his first family in Missouri. They heard from Iris's sister about the threatening messages. They saw the Christmas Eve video of Milan and Nigel singing together. Knowing what would happen less than 24 hours later, on November 3rd, 2025, after hearing all the evidence, the jury reached a verdict. Guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty of killing Iris. Guilty of killing 11-year-old Nigel. Guilty of killing 10-month-old Honora. The jury also found Milan Ross guilty on 3 counts of aggravated assault, related to the murders and 17 counts of aggravated assault on a peace officer. The verdict came 8 years after the murders. Justice delayed, but not denied. Anthony Milan Ross's sentencing is scheduled for January 9th, 2026. He faces multiple life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. There is also the possibility of the death penalty, either by lethal injection or by the gas chamber. Methods still available under Arizona law. When that day comes, Milan Ross will stand before a judge and hear his fate. The family of Iris, Nigel, and Honora will have the opportunity to make victim impact statements, to speak directly about what was taken from them that Christmas Day. Mary Wagas has spoken publicly about her grief. She described Nigel as a really cool kid with a big personality. She remembered Honora's smile. She spoke of Iris's ambition, her kindness, the way she would go out of her way to make someone's day better. All 3 of them gone. 3 lives ended in an afternoon of violence that began with a man who couldn't let go, who couldn't accept that his carefully constructed image had crumbled. The 2 daughters from Milan's first family, Shalonda and Ebony, have also spoken. They said they were more than willing to testify if needed, to tell their truth about the man their father really was beneath the public persona. They've moved past their trauma through counseling and therapy, but they carry the scars of their childhood. And what of the public who followed Milan Ross's journey? The people who read his book, attended his talks, believed in his message of transformation. They were left to grapple with the disconnect between the man they thought they knew and the reality of what he had done. The case of Anthony Milan Ross raises difficult questions about the nature of change and redemption. Can someone truly transform themselves? Milan Ross lost hundreds of pounds and became a vegan chef, a motivational speaker, an author. He helped other people. His message resonated with thousands. But beneath the transformation, the old patterns remained. The abuse he had inflicted on his first family, the abandonment, the violence, the need for control. These things didn't disappear when the weight came off. They were still there, waiting. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that Milan Ross's message wasn't entirely false. People can change their lives. They can lose weight, adopt healthier habits, transform their physical health. But physical transformation doesn't automatically heal psychological wounds or address deep-seated issues of control, violence, and abuse. The case also highlights the hidden nature of domestic abuse. To the outside world, Milan and Iris seemed like a happy couple, the perfect family. But behind closed doors, there was a history of control and manipulation, red flags that perhaps weren't visible until it was too late. Iris Ross filed for divorce. She tried to escape. She was building a new life for herself and her children. But on Christmas Day, when she arrived to pick up Nigel and Honora, she walked into a nightmare. We're left to wonder what might have been if Iris's fears had been taken more seriously, if Milan's first family had come forward sooner, if the justice system had intervened. Could this tragedy have been prevented? There are no easy answers. Only the stark reality of 3 lives lost and countless others forever changed. As we come to the end of this story, take a moment to breathe. Let the weight of this tragedy settle, but don't let it overwhelm you. These stories matter. They remind us that beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary lives, there are struggles we may not see. People we think we know may harbor secrets we can't imagine. The case of Anthony Milan Ross is a reminder to look beneath the surface, to question the images people project, to take seriously the warning signs of abuse and violence, and to remember that true transformation must go deeper than the physical. It must address the wounds of the soul. Rest now. Let the story drift through your mind as you fall asleep. Remember Iris, who tried to make everyone's day better. Remember Nigel, with his big personality and love of performing. Remember baby Honora, who barely got to experience life at all. Their memories deserve to be honored. Their story deserves to be told. And perhaps, in the telling, we can find some measure of meaning in the tragedy.
Good night.